clarify times?
Yeah, so I said couple of hours.
Yeah.
So
it's already now 1:45.
Okay.
Try and be done by 3.
Very latest.
Yeah.
It's 1:45. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh god, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
Well, no, it's more that we've got to get all our stuff home.
Yeah, exactly.
Where have you got to get back to?
Back to London. So Phil lives in Manchester, so he'll be going back to Manchester.
Oh, okay.
So I'm after Phil's job then.
Phil's the podcast man, though.
All right.
Right. Okay. I am rolling on both of these. Are you rolling, Phil?
Yeah, we're all good.
All right. I'm just going to give us a clap first.
Great, ready. Do you want me to start, or do you want to start? What would you prefer?
Well, I'll ask the first question.
Yeah, go for it.
How you doing, Marianna Spring? Thanks for coming down to interview with us today for the lightpaper. I mean, you presumably know what we kind of think of your journalism and what have you, but we can get into that later. What I want to know, first question is, what does Marianna Spring think of what Marianna Spring is doing? What is the, what's the thrust of your journalism? What is your work all about?
Thank you for having me, and thanks so much for meeting and chatting to me. So I am the BBC's disinformation and social media correspondent, which I'm sure you already know. And my job and what I do is investigating the real world harm that's caused by mistruths on social media, by hate, by harmful content online, and I do that in a range of different formats. I do it for podcasts, I do it for BBC Panorama, I do it for documentaries, for online, and the work that I do, for me, the most important part of the work I do is speaking to the people who are affected by this, understanding exactly how these kinds of messages spread and how they spread, and I really like to be able to speak to people like you. I like to be able to speak to a whole range of different people to try and understand that, and I like to speak to the people who are affected too, and I've maintained, I keep in touch with the people who have often lived through really difficult things who I've spoken to. So that's one of the most important bits of what I do.
So in essence, would you say you're trying to create a better world, more truth, more justice? Okay. I mean, I would always. There has to be positive impacts to your journalism, right?
Yeah, and I would always say that I'm not a campaigner, I'm a reporter. And my job is to investigate and to expose, and there have been lots of tangible impact and outcome of the journalism I do. The reporting I do has been raised in Parliament. It's resulted in social media companies changing policies. It's resulted in certainly kind of different action being taken by policymakers or individuals, lots of reaction. And at the centre of everything I do are the real people who are affected by this, and that's really important to me.
Right.
Okay, shall I do mine?
Yes, your turn.
Thank you. This is like a sort of playing Uno or something.
Don't know what that is, but okay.
You never played Uno?
Sorry, no.
Oh, okay, fine.
I'm a bit older than you, before my time.
Thanks so much for chatting to me
My
today.
pleasure.
And would you mind just telling me a little bit about you, what you do, and who you are?
Okay, well, my name's Darren Nesbitt. I'm a musician from Manchester. And about 10 years ago, I woke up or realised the fact that we're living in an entirely deceptive world. And then 3 years ago, I started the lightpaper with no publishing experience or anything else before. And it runs with an amazing team of people all over the country.
And just to kind of do a little follow-up, why... tell me, why did you start that paper? What was the real motivation?
Well, I think The Guardian got it right straight away. We're beating the online censorship, which obviously you guys helped put in place. So if real doctors, scientists, whoever it is, have genuine concerns, you guys aren't covering them. That's why we started the lightpaper. So basically, the general public can have information that is being gatekept from them, but gatekept, should we say? It's been kept from them, and it's been kept from them for agendas and purposes. So that's why we started the lightpaper, and it's been running 2.5 years, extremely successfully, still going strong today. So it started in the pandemic and the lockdown, but it's still going strong today.
Perfect. Sorry, that was brilliant. Thank you.
My turn.
Your turn. Yeah, I'll note little follow-ups on my phone.
Pass the card back. Yeah, I mean, if there's a little follow-up, then just do it straight away.
Yeah, okay. Well, actually, I was just going to say...
go on, as long as it's not a separate question.
Actually, no, I'll do it as my next question.
Okay.
You do yours. Let me just note what I wanted to ask.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, well, there's a question at the end of this, but I'd like to read a quote from David Hansard about, obviously, your journalism. Whichever subject she's writing about, be it COVID, climate, Ukraine, now about the response to the disappearance in St Michael's on Wire, each of her articles uses the same formula. They all follow a similar pattern and have a similar aim. Spring's message is nearly always that there are legions of malicious actors, whether state-sponsored or otherwise, who wanted to deceive us and who are inflicting significant damage on society. In short, be afraid. Yet you don't have to look too deeply into what she writes to see that her conclusion rarely follows from her premises and is not supported by the facts. What she says does not add up. And in following her formula, the reasonable opinions of a large number of people who are sceptical of the orthodox views held by politicians and most of the media are not only not given a fair hearing, they're ignored. Or worse, they're dismissed or even smeared. This is achieved by subtly and falsely associating with what is in fact a very small number of people who hold bizarre and questionable views. So the focus is almost entirely shifted to the relatively small number of people who are conspiracy theorists. By directing readers' attention in this way and laying the emphasis on this diminutive group, which is exactly what your podcast series and what your journalism is about, you're focusing on those people. It helps create the impression that the number of people who believe such things is far larger and more of a problem is likely the case. This is what Spring does again and again, whatever the topic. So the question is, why do you always conflate opposition to the government with online abuse and extreme views held by a tiny minority? Don't you think that you're over-exaggerating both the number and threat from those fringe thinkers of society?
Okay, thank you for your question. I wholly disagree with that statement, and I also disagree that I do that. I always endeavour to separate very legitimate and reasonable concerns and questions that people have from the more extreme views and ideas that are contrary to evidence and fact. So there was an example there, I think, in that paragraph about Nicola Bulley's disappearance in St Michael's on Wire. So when I was reporting on that, I was understanding how that particular story was going especially viral on TikTok. And it wasn't just people speculating, asking questions, which is to be expected when there's some kind of disappearance or often when there's a really sort of quite shocking case in the news, but going as far as suggesting that there were crisis actors involved or that this was not real, it had been staged in some way. And that was really contrary to the evidence at hand, and it was very distressing and upsetting for the people who are close to Nicola. And so I always make sure that I say I don't overstate how many people believe those things, but I use facts and data. So in that case, I use data to show how viral those kinds of ideas had been on TikTok, which was a significant number of views, comments, posts that were being shared on that topic. And I always state that it's a committed minority who are believing those more extreme ideas. That doesn't mean everyone does, but there's ample research that I've included in my journalism. Another example would be Disaster Trolls, a recent podcast I did for Radio 4. In that, there was some research from King's College that backed up a lot of what we were discovering, which is not that there are loads and loads of people who believe that the Manchester Arena attack was staged, but that there are a significant minority of people who do actually question and are concerned that it didn't happen in the way it did. And having sat opposite Manchester Arena survivors who have really lived through the worst and were really seriously injured and their lives were changed, I think it's really vital that we cover this, because even if it's not millions of people who are posting these ideas or are sharing them, they can cause really serious harm to people. And the people in that case were left feeling frightened, they didn't feel safe at home, and they really are people who are some of the bravest people I've ever met. So I just think that is why it's so important that I do the journalism I do and that I'm able to investigate these areas. And my job is specifically looking at what happens on social media. And there are lots of pockets of people, groups of people, committed followers of all kinds of different topics and areas. And this is one of those areas I cover.
When does the BBC cover the majority opposition to the government? It never does. It never does. You have the official line, which is broadcast 24/7. And then you have you guys who cover the extreme fringe thinkers of those that oppose the government. There is never, ever any discussion with, valid doctors, scientists, etc., etc. There certainly wasn't during COVID. They were all blank. They were all othered. They were all called conspiracy theorists, which is another thing you do. Obviously, we can get into that in a bit. So while you might say, look, we realise that, we recognise that it is a small amount of people, that's not the impression that you're giving the public through the BBC. The entire setup seems to be that you are focusing on these people in order to smear all of the other people who oppose quite obviously dangerous and tyrannical government policies.
So I disagree with you on that, because I think that there are two different things we're talking about here. One is how I report on disinformation on social media and the more extreme ideas that are being shared and the impact that those can have, and often the hate that accompanies them that I and others have experienced firsthand. That's one thing. Separately, the BBC frequently covers anti-government rallies. It frequently covers, for example, there was this anti-Republican rally that happened over the weekend to do with the coronation. We cover that. We covered a lot of the rallies and protests that were happening in retaliation against the new laws that were being introduced around protests. We quite frequently cover those stories on the BBC website. Obviously, I'm here, like we've said, to kind of talk about my journalism and what I can say. But I think it's important to know that the teams at the BBC, whether it's politics, whether it's happening in relation to kind of civil societies, the teams that cover all kinds of different areas, do frequently on the BBC website report on opposition to government policy, and actually they interrogate those issues and are trying to hear from a range of different voices. So that does happen. And when it came to the COVID-19 rallies that were happening, there was coverage of those rallies. The difference between those and then, for example, some of the opposition to the new protest measures being introduced. And I think this is important, that often rallies don't just have one, the people there are attending for different reasons often, and they have different things they're worried about. And when it came to the opposition to lockdown restrictions, while there were absolutely people there who were frustrated about lockdown and who were questioning government decisions and who were angry at the government's behaviour and what they'd done, there were also people promoting more extreme ideas. And there was, for example, I attended, and there were posters linked to the QAnon conspiracy theory. There were allegations that vaccines were being used to kill millions of people.
So again, but again, we're using the same tactic of, yes, there were, we'll talk about the numbers thing in a second, but again, you're saying all you have to do is go to this rally of 100,000 people, 90% of them are regular people, 10% of them are going to have these extreme views. Your job is to take those extreme views and make that the story.
Sorry, do you mind if I just reply to that? But not at all, that's not my job. My job is to, as I always have when I've covered these rallies, make sure that I say, while there are people who attend who have legitimate views, a lot of the people, and I go around speaking to people, and not just people with posters, all kinds of people. And often people can hold both of those views at the same time. Often they can have legitimate opposition to rules and regulations and laws, but then they also can express more extreme views. And part of my job is trying to unpick that. And that's just in relation to this. There are whole teams at the BBC who cover quite extensively people who attend rallies, and there's no talk of conspiracy theories or more extreme disinformation because it's just not present at those rallies.
We've never seen them on the broadcast. We've never seen them on the BBC News at 6 o'clock. We've never seen. I mean,
well, there's been loads of coverage of rallies.
I'm not sure how many people turned up at the BBC itself with the Truth Be Told, where they have the COVID vaccine injured, hundreds of them, and there was thousands of rallies. And there's a picture taken from inside the BBC. And you didn't report on it. You reported on, what was it you reported on that day? Some roller skate tragedy in America or something it was. Where is it? Have I got it? There's a lovely picture of you of just outside the BBC. There's also what I wanted to talk about as well in terms of the rallies. This is how you guys portray the rallies. Now, we went to several of them. The first ones and I know this for a fact because I was there. The first one not first one, but one of the major ones in Trafalgar Square, 29th of August, had about 25,000 people. The one the month after, 26th of September, was even more full, so it had around 40,000 people. Then they started doing marches, and they went from like 50,000, 100,000, 250,000 to the big one on 24th of April, and it's really hard to get when it goes for when it goes to a really big number. Some say 500,000, some say 1 million, some say 2 million. You're going to get these exaggerations, of course. But the way you report it is not thousands of people, many thousands of people, are marching and protesting. You've got more than 150 arrests at London anti-lockdown protests. Same way as The Guardian did it. Police arrest 155 anti-lockdown protesters in London.
I think...
Here we go, 26th of September. Now, I was at this rally. I sang at this rally. It was there we went from 12 o'clock, I think, or even earlier. I got on stage about 3, just before David Icke. As soon as David Icke finished, all these coppers came in. We'd been there for 6 hours singing, having a great time, really happy. Everybody was really happy because obviously the lockdown rules, so people were able to be together. By the way, there wasn't a mass illness. People didn't get ill, like crazy after that, even though we were packed in like sardines and ignoring social distancing. The point is that we had a great rally. It was a peaceful, uplifting rally. You send the government send the cops in, and then you guys just report on that. This is the lens that you show the public.
So what's worth me saying in relation to this kind of coverage is that often when there are protests, there are loads of protests that happen all the time across the UK and all the time in London. Yeah. And the BBC cannot cover absolutely every single protest all the time. So
but
often,
you did cover it, and you said a few thousand anti-lockdown protesters marching.
Yeah, so I turned up to cover that rally.
Ostensibly, they're against Brexit, but it's been organised on Telegram and Facebook with conspiracies, fringe beliefs. That's how you report
but that is the truth.
Massive general public opposition to the government. Yeah.
But the truth is, as I've just explained, that while there are people there who legitimately oppose restrictions or government, there were a lot of extreme and fringe beliefs on display from people I spoke to and that I saw, and I'm tweeting there what I see with my own eyes. I attended, and I think that's important, that actually I frequently, all the time, make the effort to go out and try and understand and cover these rallies. There are not many media organisations that do that, and I do it because I believe our job is to understand, and our job is to ask questions, and it is to interrogate. And that's important.
Okay, but again, I am going to repeat to myself quite a lot. Again, your focus is on those people that have got, the more extreme placards. Now, you organise a protest or a march or an event, you can't police who's going to come, yeah? But if you spoke to, lots of just ordinary people, ordinary family people, you may or may you're going to get strange views. People hold strange views, but the question is, are those views dangerous to other people? Now, you're saying basically. You're not saying it, but you insinuate it, and it's a very subtle language manipulation. But what you do is you basically say everybody that's opposing these government policies, everybody that is against what all the major policies that are going on in the world, is a fringe conspiracy theorist.
Firstly, I've never said that everybody who opposes lockdown measures is a fringe conspiracy theorist.
Didn't say you did, I say you insinuate it.
I've never said that, and that's not what I think either.
Okay.
I think that my job and my specialism, and this is the way the BBC works, there are different reporters who have different specialisms and cover different areas. My job is to cover what's happening on social media and the way that disinformation can spread, the way hate can spread, the way all kinds of ideas can spread online. And I look a lot at Telegram, I look a lot at what's happening online. And a lot of the Telegram groups are really big groups, you know that. They're not tiny, and that's important. And one of the reasons I'm covering it is because there are a significant number of people who are interested in and a part of these movements, and that's important. I agree that it's complicated, that there are people who agree that there are people who turn up to rallies with legitimate views. They also, in the same breath, can then say things to me that are not true. When it comes to the case of these rallies, this is happening in a pandemic where, and I know you don't agree with me on this, but the evidence says otherwise, there were lots of people who were at risk of getting really poorly. COVID-19 was real. I've spoken to doctors, I've spoken to real people who've been harmed, who've lost loved ones. I was interviewing someone just the other day who lost their dad during COVID-19 to COVID-19. If there is false and misleading information being spread about health during a health crisis, that can have a real world impact. As a case I investigated really extensively was the story of a man called Gary Matthews in Shropshire for a podcast called Death by Conspiracy. It was asking that question. And he had subscribed to increasingly extreme beliefs around COVID-19. He didn't take any measures to protect himself. He didn't ask for help when he needed it. He died at home on his own of COVID-19. It was really distressing for his family and even for him at the end when he realised that he was really ill. So that's part of my job, is to make sure that I'm investigating these stories so that I can expose the harm that can be done if people are being misled or subscribing to false and misleading information. And during a public health crisis, that's a really important job for a public interest broadcaster.
Well, that's assuming it is a public health crisis. Have you got the clip of the...
we're on about 5 of your questions.
The clip of the... absolutely, yeah. I was thinking about myself. The clip of the doctor, the well-credentialed doctor,
So what we'll do is, if we do this question, and then is it all right if I ask like 5 or 6?
Yeah. That's for after.
Oh, for after. Okay.
Yeah,
so can I ask you a few questions? Is that all right?
Okay.
Do you want that now, darling? Or?
Well, just get if you can get it.
Which one was it?
It's the guy on the podcast. I've forgotten his name.
Dowd or Dr. Roger Hodkinson?
Roger Hodkinson.
Okay. Why don't we'll come to that after I've asked you a few. Is that all right?
We can go back.
Because I want to ask you a few questions about the light.
COVID-19. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. So that's a big one, and you opened it up.
Okay.
Pass you some information, Dad.
Sure.
Might be useful.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, 1 second.
No,
Yeah,
that's
we don't have it that high.
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay. Okay.
Go on.
So, you're good? Perfect. Okay. So I want to ask you some questions about the light specifically. Would you mind telling me a little bit about the process for pulling together the monthly paper?
Yeah.
How do you decide what stories you're going to include? How do you decide who you're going to commission? How does it work?
Well, we don't generally commission anybody, although I do ask a couple of people possibly to write articles on things that are happening, obviously. Most of it comes in organically. So whatever people are motivated to write about, they will write it, send it in. Obviously we've got regular writers, but it's open to anybody, obviously, as long as it's topical, it's relevant, it's not being covered really by the mainstream media, or it's been covered with obviously a significant agenda, a significant slant. And obviously it's got to be truthful and of national interest.
And how do you verify what they're saying to you? How do you kind of go through the process of checking that what they're saying is true?
Yeah, obviously. Generally, most of the articles are drawn from government and official sources, so the unsealed Pfizer documents. We've got obviously the whistleblower, which explains how the NHS changed, or how the government changed the death reporting from 2016 to 2019. They actually put in the medical examiner system, so they were able to report as many deaths as they like as COVID when it came along. So is that true? Is the whistleblower completely lying? Possibly. We didn't actually interview them ourselves. But at the end of the day, everything they said was true. So the government did bring in a medical examiner system. Hospitals were paid extra to put deaths down as COVID-19, and that's how they were able to, basically convert flu and pneumonia into a brand new pandemic disease.
And when it comes to just a bit more about sort of how the paper works, I'm so interested in how the paper is still in print, because there are lots of people who are having to kind of put their publications online. They don't print copies. Is it expensive to run a printed paper, and how do you fund it? I know you kind of explained that in your latest copy, but could you talk me through that?
How expensive? I don't. It depends. I mean, when we did the first copy, it was £1,200 to print it. Nowadays, it costs about £20,000 to get it all done. So it's a lot for people, for ordinary working people. But that's the power of. And
how do you raise those funds?
Well, this is what I'm about to say. That's the power of our movement, if you like. This paper will end tomorrow. If the people don't want to write for it, and if they don't want to distribute it, if they say no, we don't agree with it, or whatever, or it's hateful or extremist or something like that, then this paper will end tomorrow. There's no large donations, there's no large backers or donors. It's pretty much equal advertisers, subscribers, and pre-orders from activists who want to go and hand out the paper, because they also want people to have the information, and they pay for it.
So they pay for it at the hub, kind of where they order it in. Is that how it works? Like, does someone order on bulk?
Yeah. So
a number of
so you'll have 10, 20 people in an area, and they'll club together and pre-order them, and then we'll send them out.
Are there specific areas where the light is more popular than others? Are there areas that you see as kind of key locations where you distribute the paper?
Not really. I mean, Devon's, that's where you came across us. Devon's always been kind of a hotbed of anti-establishment activity, so I believe. So, we're reasonably strong down there, but we're strong in every city, Yorkshire, Scotland, Newcastle, wherever people are, and they want to pass out the light paper, they get together and buy them, and that's the way it works. It's completely people funded, people supported, people written, really.
Do you have any endorsers, celebrity endorsers, or people who have been in touch with you who back the paper, people here in the UK or beyond? So, for example, I'd come across Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was really supportive of the German paper that you'd written about.
Right, yeah.
I don't know whether anyone like that has ever sort of expressed their support or interest in the paper.
He himself would obviously never stoop to do that, I'm sure. But I'm sure we've printed an article or two from Children's Health Defence, so we've been in touch with their London office. Not that I know of. I mean, I suppose the most famous one is the one we interviewed, Matt Letitia. But yeah, we don't have any. Yeah, I mean, we're not supported by the big alternative media either. We really are just a bunch of amateurs.
And MPs as well. I know you're supportive of Andrew Bridgen in the paper. Are there any MPs that you're in touch with or who've been supportive?
No.
Not even Bridgen?
We're not even been in touch with Bridgen yet. I mean, obviously the people, we're always one step away from say Andrew Bridgen or what have you. So in other words, somebody's in contact with him. So when it's time to do an interview, that will come up. It's you this month then.
Okay, and I'll ask you one last question, and then you can go back to asking me.
Yeah.
In your latest edition, where you lay out your funding and the sources of income, you also talk about foreign publications that are similar to the Light. So you talk about a paper in Germany, one in Canada, and then the 2 operations in Australia and Ireland. Tell me a bit about those papers. Are you kind of regularly in contact with them? What's your relationship like with them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the Irish Light started a few months after ours. The Light Australia started sometime around the turn of the year, I think. They just happen to have the same name. They like what we do, so they're copying it. There's no franchise, there's no fee. We obviously ask a lot of questions at the start, kind of similar to what you do. How the hell did you get this started, and how do you keep it going? So we just share that information out to them. We're dying for somebody in America to start one. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. There's also the Dutch paper as well. So quite a lot of countries are coming up with the same kind of idea, printed paper. It harks back to the old 17th, 18th century pamphleteering, which, changed a lot for the people, changed a lot for the social justice, really moved it for the people.
And just to follow up on...
We just kind of think we're a posh version of that, really.
And when it comes to... because Germany, I've been in touch with the team there, and I know they've been in touch with you because they posted on Instagram sort of some of the correspondence that they'd had with you. Do you regularly talk to them?
Twice a year, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Yeah, just, mutual support, I suppose. He interviewed me for his paper. I think his wife's English, but just really nice people. I know in the email, he copied me into the email where he kind of said the same thing that we did, but he expanded a bit more, and he refused to do an interview with you, obviously, because of who you are and who you work for and what have you. We thought that, but I also thought it'd be nice to get an interview for the paper and find out what you're all about. Okay, so can we show you this video? Dr. Roger Hodkinson talking. This is early days, right?
Yeah.
Talking about the pandemic.
In Canada.
Have you got a?
It should be loud enough,
Okay.
actually, Darren.
Okay, go.
We will now go to S. Peterson.
Mr. Chairman, this is Dr. Hodkinson. I just want to let you know I'm standing by.
Oh, okay. Well, we would love to hear from you. The floor is yours.
I am Dr. Roger Hodkinson, CEO and Medical Director. I'd like to briefly tell you about the deeply held ethical principles that have guided us through every step of our 25 successful years of operation and many tens of thousands of medical assessments. We embrace what we call the medical model in all we do. We consider our involvement to be the practice of medicine, and I lead the company as a physician specialist with decades of experience. Secondly, in every case we facilitate, there is the presumption of a legitimate presentation unless proven otherwise. The reports we generate are quality assured by me personally and are all underpinned by evidence-based clarity.
It comes.
And we have no ethical conflicts as we have no involvement with the provision of treatment or case management. To have a good test that labels someone as having cancer.
Right, yeah.
That's right.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
The clip I saw earlier, he was just like, look, this is the case.
We're just having a little bit of a breather. I'm just like, watching.
It's a good job we got till 3 o'clock, eh?
Contain this virus.
Yeah, there we go. Come. I'm going to go back any further.
To address you on this very important matter. What I'm going to say is lay language and blunt. It's counter-narrative, and so you don't immediately think I'm a quack. I'm going to briefly outline my credentials so that you can understand where I'm coming from in terms of knowledge base in all of this. I'm a medical specialist in pathology, which includes virology. I trained at Cambridge University in the UK. I'm the ex-president of the pathology section of the Medical Association. I was previously an assistant professor in the Faculty of Medicine doing a lot of teaching. I was the chairman of the Royal College of Physicians of Canada Examination Committee in Pathology in Ottawa. But more to the point, I'm currently the chairman of a biotechnology company in North Carolina selling a COVID-19 test. And you might say I know a little bit about all of this. The bottom line is simply this. There is utterly unfounded public hysteria driven by the media and politicians. It's outrageous. This is the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public. There is absolutely nothing that can be done to contain this virus other than protecting older, more vulnerable people. It should be thought of nothing more than a bad flu season. This is not Ebola. It's not SARS. It's politics playing medicine, and that's a very dangerous game. There is no action of any kind needed other than what happened last year when we felt unwell. We stayed home, we took chicken noodle soup, we didn't visit Granny, and we decided when we would return to work. We didn't need anyone to tell us. Masks are utterly useless. There is no evidence base for their effectiveness whatsoever. Paper masks and fabric masks are simply virtue signaling. They're not even worn effectively most of the time. It's utterly ridiculous seeing these unfortunate, uneducated people, I'm not saying that in a pejorative sense, seeing these people walking around like lemmings, obeying without any knowledge base to put the mask on their face. Social distancing is also useless because COVID is spread by aerosols, which travel 30 meters or so before landing. Enclosures have had such terrible unintended consequences. Everywhere should be open tomorrow, as was stated in the Great Barrington Declaration that I circulated prior to this meeting. And a word on...
That's a good point, the Great Barrington Declaration. My question was simply, why did the BBC never interview him? Is he a fringe extreme conspiracy theorist? Him, the Great Barrington Declaration was 35,000 medical professionals. It was buried, never seen by the media. You know, if you're going to go, okay, we've got a pandemic, and then you're going to get credentialed doctors and what have you who know about it, who figured out it's a scam, it's a hoax, it's a lie, and they want to tell people what they're going to do. They're going to do exactly what they did. And new media just completely ignored it. So just 1 second, it's just to back it up again. So we've got Nobel Prize winner Dr. Luc Montagnier, retired scientist Mike Yeadon, quite famous, he's ex-Pfizer, and we've got Dr. Rob Malone. You denigrated all these people, smeared them, never had them on the BBC or what have you. And the only part you had, GMTV had Piers Corbyn on once. But these guys, nothing about medicine, nothing about science. They're allowed to speak freely amongst many other people, Tony Blair, etc., etc. Very, very biased, very, very one-sided reporting in order to promote the pandemic. What do you have to say to that?
So I think that it's really important, again, and I would say this, that it's my job to report on the areas that I do, and that there are teams at the BBC who specialise in covering health, for example, and different issues. Well, they do.
You are representing the BBC as well.
No, I'm not a BBC spokesperson. I'm here to talk about my reporting, but I can answer your question, which is that the BBC throughout the pandemic repeatedly spoke to a range of doctors, scientists, really well-respected people in their field. And the body of scientific evidence pointed towards COVID being real, it being serious,
You
and
just
it being
seem to be
dangerous.
repeating a talking point.
It's not the talking points, it's just the truth. I interviewed, for example, Mike Yeadon, who you just showed there.
Right.
I tried really hard to get him to do an interview with me. I wanted to speak to him. He didn't want to speak to me. I covered a video, the Ask the Experts video, as part of a panorama investigation I did back at the beginning of 2021. I endeavoured to speak to several of the people in those videos. I wanted to understand more about what they were doing. They were promoting ideas that were contrary to the evidence. The idea, for example, that the vaccine
they were promoting ideas that
alter-
were contrary to the narrative.
No, they were contrary to the evidence. They were saying things that, for example, that the vaccine can change your DNA.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm
just
support
forget
that.
about the vaccine yet. We're just talking
Okay.
about the doctors
Yes.
who were saying there is no pandemic, there is no new disease. This is complete hysteria from governments and media.
So there was, again, lots of evidence that lots of people were getting really poorly from COVID-19 during the pandemic.
No, there was evidence that they were getting poorly.
Okay.
Okay.
There was
He's
evidence
just
that it was
said-
from COVID-19.
He's just said flu and pneumonia. It was a case of
But
flu.
I do think that no matter what I say to you, you're not going to agree with me, because what I say, and I'll say again, is that the body of scientific evidence, which the BBC covered
There is no
extensively...
consensus. There's no
There is a
such thing
consensus.
as a scientific consensus.
But there
if
is
we
a
have
majority
a scientific
belief.
consensus, then science has stopped.
But there is a majority belief.
No,
there are
isn't.
more doctors and scientists who disagree with the people you're showing me than there are these people.
Can you find any doctors who agree with the government, whatever, who weren't financially?
Yeah, there were lots of doctors.
Involved with it.
There were
So
all
people
kinds
who
of
didn't
people
work
that
for the system, didn't work for the NHS, didn't work for any of the companies, but still,
There were lots of doctors who featured on the BBC. There was a guy I interviewed, Liam Smith, who had nothing to do with the government. He worked for the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He had nothing to do with, I've interviewed loads of doctors who have nothing to do with the government. And I think what's important here, and what you're talking about, which again is the kind of untangling of two different things. People can absolutely have their own opinions and criticise the way the pandemic was handled, the decisions that are made by politicians, the way that doctors appear with politicians and talk about an issue. They could feel like was mentioned there, that it's too political or it's not too political. That's just all part of public debate and people having a conversation. But that's very different from people then suggesting things that are false or misleading. For example, that COVID is not serious, or that people are not being killed by COVID, or that this is not a real pandemic. That is contrary to the body of scientific evidence. And that is different from other criticisms about how a government handles something, which the BBC also looked at. We have covered things like Partygate extensively. We've covered all kinds of issues extensively, and that's the politics team's job to do that. So my answer to your question is that the BBC have and do cover the evidence, and what we always do is interrogate all sides and all the evidence available to us, and I certainly do that in my reporting, before we then make sense of that evidence for the audience. That's our job.
The body of scientific evidence came out pretty quickly that if you were under 70 and didn't have any comorbidities, the chances of dying from COVID was 0.00001%.
But again, the risk here, and as I will say, I'm not a health reporter. My job is to cover online disinformation and social media.
Right, but that comes from the stories, right?
Yeah,
that comes from the facts and evidence. The point is that I would not go out and personally investigate
do you think that
false information if I thought that was correct information.
Yeah, but these things are false. Like the idea that there were a significant number of people who died from COVID-19, and it was real and it was serious. There were hospitals that were overrun. There were hospitals that had that were really struggling to keep on top of it. I've spoken to doctors who firsthand have spoken me through really difficult situations where they're trying to look after patients, and that's part of me bolstering my own reporting to understand what was really going on. So I would say to you, like, do you genuinely think that COVID-19 was not real?
People got ill, and they got ill from what they normally get ill from. I'll read you a quote.
There's loads of evidence
I'll
that
read you a
wasn't
quote
the case.
from the NHS whistleblower. It's very short, actually. I think it's in the
latest episode.
It's in the latest copy, so you're probably ready. But we don't want to go too far into it. But just right, the bit of. The bit we've highlighted, patients being admitted and dying with very common conditions such as old age, myocardial infarctions, end-stage kidney failure, hemorrhages, stroke, COPD and cancer were all now being certified as COVID-19 by the medical examiner system. Okay, so if this is true, and surely the BBC should investigate, because if the medical examiner system means that one person in the hospital can now declare whatever as COVID-19, that means you've now got a pandemic on your hands, or you can create one.
But the BBC has covered extensively, you know, the way that those COVID statistics have changed, and as time has gone on and people have been vaccinated, there are people who present with other medical conditions who will also have COVID-19. You know, there's been a lot of coverage of that by the health team, and I think it's really important to understand again that in the depths of the pandemic, when we were in lockdowns, there was a real health crisis on our hands. There were people who were dying of, you know, if you look at some of the predictions, the Lancet, for example, had published how if we did not have the vaccine, it's estimated that 14 million more people could have died worldwide from COVID-19. You know, these are
discredited.
No, well, it wasn't.
It was again, discredited.
No, by you, but not by the
by doctors. I'm not a medical practitioner either.
But not by the majority of doctors. By the doctors you're talking about, and we're not going to agree on this.
Okay, well, let's ask that question just on what you said. Does truth depend on what the majority believe?
No, absolutely it doesn't. But it does depend.
You have said about 20 times now that the majority scientific opinion, the majority body of evidence. You know, back in the 15th century, people used to, and before, people used to believe the Earth is flat. That was the majority opinion.
People still believe the Earth is flat.
Was that correct? Who knows? Majority of people's opinion believe we're spinning around on a ball in the universe now. Fine. Okay.
Do you think we are?
Does the majority opinion, doesn't matter right now, but does the majority opinion, that's the question.
No, the majority evidence. The majority evidence. The majority of evidence.
When you get breakthroughs, inventions, discoveries. In fact, Einstein went against the prevailing people of the day. All the new discoveries and inventions always go against the prevailing thoughts of the times. You know. It's quite obvious through history that humans, especially in mass, especially en masse, can be led astray, especially by those who rule, because they used to be persuaded that sacrificing your children to the great god of the sky will mean the volcano will stop erupting, and they believe that. Showing how malleable people are. Now, if you are born into a world where the education system tells you this, and the media tell you this, and the government tell you this, and it's all what have you, you have no reason to suspect that any of it's because everything works, everything's normal, everything works. But if all those organisations have actually been compromised and are subtly leading people astray in the same way that they've always been led astray, to maybe not to sacrifice children, or maybe to put injections in their arms that may not be as safe for them, as they are led to believe, then that's obviously really, really dangerous and really, really scary. What I'm asking you to do is consider the possibility, because, you may still consider us fringe conspiracy theorists, extremist thinkers, but consider the possibility that you may be completely in the wrong. You may work for one of the organisations, but obviously the whole thing, where, despite believing right now that you're doing the right thing, that you're on the side of the truth. That you are actually, there was no, if you found out the truth, imagine if you found out that everything that you've been doing is wrong, everything that the BBC was doing is wrong. How would that feel? But
that's just not the case.
Well, first of all, do you consider that possibility that you might?
What we do,
because you've obviously spoken to a lot of people who oppose.
Yeah, I have. What we do is we interrogate the evidence available to us, and I feel confident, having interrogated that evidence myself, that it points towards, for example, in this instance, COVID-19 being real, it being serious, it posing a threat. That is different from then the subsequent criticisms of how it's handled that did come out during the pandemic, and that the BBC has covered and that I have covered. I've spoken about people's legitimate opposition as well as these more extreme views and conspiracy theories that can cause serious harm to people. So I don't think that. I could ask the same question to you. How would you feel if all of this, wasn't true? If you'd been misled? Yeah, I'd be absolutely gutted, because my aim is not to do anything else apart from get to the truth and then obviously let other people have a bash at seeing that information as well. If that information is kept from them, and then they don't get to make a choice at all. But what happens if it's wrong? Well, that's for them to decide. So you're setting yourself up as the arbiter of truth. You're saying, and Mike Wendling said it as well, look, we shouldn't give equal weight to conspiracy theories or those that oppose the government, because it's wrong. We wouldn't give, if the police
arrested a mass murderer, we wouldn't give equal weight to their manifesto as we would to the police report. Now again, he's done that same old tactic of conflating now people who oppose the government with mass murderers. Now again, he's not directly saying that, but that's not how it works. Yeah, the language used is to manipulate you to go in. Everybody that opposes the government is an extremist. Yeah, it's always control of language. Now, you may or may not know, you may or may not be actively doing it, but here's an interesting thing that you said to the House of Commons Select Committee. I often think that disinformation
also,
is
do you mind
so
if I
effective.
ask some questions in a minute?
More. Let me just finish, and then
That's
it's yours.
all right, no worries.
Yeah, no problem. I've got more because I haven't asked the question yet. Yeah, but so I often think that disinformation is so effective because it is emotional and it gets people to react. It often takes one emblematic case and says, "Look, this has happened." It makes people sit up and take notice. I think, these are your words, I think we have to weaponise those same tactics in the journalism we do and bring stuff to life so that people understand the impact it has and so that we can engage them in a range of formats. So are you engaged in a battle? Are you fighting a war of information?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't consider myself a sort of fighter. I think that implies that I'm, again, like a campaigner. What I mean there, and I totally agree with that, and I'd say it again and again, and I've said it lots, is that the way that disinformation works is that it plays on people's fears and concerns and then feeds them misleading information, stuff that can lead to serious harm to them and to others. And my job is to help people understand how that happens. And that's why investigations like disaster trolls or death by conspiracy or even kind of more broader stories like the story of Ollie Stevens that I investigated for BBC Panorama. He was a little boy who was murdered near his home. It's really important that people understand how social media works and how it can affect them and the way they can be targeted. And the best way of ensuring that the audience are really able to engage with that is that it's human, it's real, and it brings it to life. And I think that that's part of being an investigative journalist. That's just how I work and what I like doing. And I really passionately believe in understanding real people who are affected by mistruths and trolling and hate. And I think it's important that that's brought to life, and that's what I'm saying there.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, you are, I mean, as far as we're concerned, you are spot on here because the BBC is the prime source of disinformation for people, and you're actually saying, and what we do is we use the emotional tactics, take one emblematic case, and, you know what I mean?
So I'm not...
And you have, I think we have to weaponise those same tactics. You're kind of saying it as a future thing, you already are doing, you already have.
Well, no, but I think the difference here is that, and this will be my last answer before I then ask you something, the difference here is that I'm talking about how misleading, claims, the idea that the Manchester Arena attack was staged, for example, that it didn't really happen, that's false, okay? But that's false and wrong, and the tactics used to promote that are often deliberately honing in on particular cases and individuals and trying to highlight how they've lied or that it doesn't seem to be that they lived through what they lived through. My job is then, in covering that is false and misleading, is to bring it to life so that people can understand the truth, so that they can see up front how terrifying those tactics are for the people really caught up in this and how demonstrably false they are. Okay, that's what I do. And that's not me promoting disinformation, quite the opposite. That is me investigating and exposing how disinformation works and how it affects people. And I've sat there with very real people who've been affected by denial of what they've lived through. And that is, I'm sure most people watching and listening would agree, a really hurtful thing for people to experience.
A quick thing, I'm just going to change the battery.
No worries, and then I'll ask.
We take a break?
Perfect. Yeah, perfect.
That was about 20 something minutes.
Go on, yeah.
Of that way, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's all right, can I ask a few in a row and then?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want those figures or anything?
Well, I mentioned it, didn't I? I
Yeah,
can't remember the exact, but thank you. Okay.
Okay. What am I going to ask you? Okay.
4, 5. I've only got 6 more questions actually.
I've got loads.
Gazillion.
No, it's all right.
So
Well, some of them
get,
some of the questions get answered in multiple answers.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which is normal. Yeah. If it runs a bit over, it's okay. It's just it can't run super over. That's all. Yeah.
1 or 2. You lose track of time when you're having fun.
I know you. I do appreciate though the ability to be able to ask you questions, and I hope that you.
Absolutely, yeah. This is fine. This
Okay.
is great.
Once everyone's back in place, I'll start us rolling again.
Okay. Oh God, my phone.
No, the little batteries are shorter.
That's all right. Okay.
You guys ready? Rolling.
There's a lovely band outside.
Yeah.
Okay. So just to follow up on a little bit of what I was asking you about before, about how it works and the distribution, have you noticed an increase or a decrease in subscribers and people ordering the paper since the pandemic?
It's been pretty level. It kind of took off in the first year, and then it's been reasonably level. It's gone down a bit since the end of the restrictions, as you'd imagine. I think that's it.
And were you surprised that people continued subscribing to the paper? Because I think for a lot of people who don't read the Light and aren't regular readers, they might think, oh, well, now that restrictions have lifted or lockdowns have ended, people won't be as interested in a paper like this. Why do you think it's continued? And were you surprised it's continued? I'm
surprised we got to the second issue. In all honesty, I'm certainly surprised it's still going. At the end of the day, people want the paper, and for as long as they want the paper, we'll keep publishing it. It really is as simple as that. The day that they say, yeah, we don't need it anymore, and they stop ordering, well, here's the day it'll stop.
And you spoke about wanting to have. You're really keen on there being a publication in the US that does similar to what you do.
It would be great, yes.
Do you ever kind of take inspiration from, or are you ever in contact with kind of prominent US media figures on this area? So it's people like Alex Jones, or there's a whole range of people really, that Breitbart, Steve Bannon. Are you interested in those people? Have you ever been in touch with them?
Yeah, we sent them the We Are the 99% song the Christmas it was out, but yeah, we didn't get a response.
From Alex Jones?
Yeah. Or Steve Bannon, or various.
Why did you want to be in touch with them?
Because we put a single out. It's always good to make contacts, but.
The paper's been criticised for links to figures who are considered far-right figures or anti-Semitic figures. So people like Mark Collette from Patriotic Alliance, Paul Joseph Watson, John Hamer, who's accused of Holocaust denial. What's your relationship with these groups?
I don't have any relationship with them.
Why do you allow them in your paper?
Because if they write good articles on topics that are, useful, topics that are interesting to people, then we should have them. At the end of the day, you're smearing them. We shouldn't always shoot the messenger before hearing the message. If somebody you don't like tells you the sky is blue, your MO is to kind of say, well, don't trust that person, because they also believe that grass is yellow.
But isn't this...
Is it possible for somebody to have, I guess, 80% true beliefs and 20% nonsense, and does that make that person a bad person, a better person, a worse person? Are we all walking around with a whole bunch of different set of beliefs? In fact, no two of us are alike. So why should there be this push to have all the same beliefs about everything? We believe in free speech. Free speech means hearing from people that you don't necessarily agree with, or even whose ideas, or some of whose ideas abhor you. But we either have free speech or we don't. If we go, well, we can have free speech, but not that, or not that, or not this, yeah? There's the difference between speech and incitement, yeah? And that's where it ends. So you can talk about anything you want. People should be able to be free to talk about any idea, and let the market decide. So in other words, if somebody's ranting there, and they're a racist, and they're a sexist, and they're just a horrible person, we're not all going to stand around listening, are we? We're going to leave them to themselves. So again, your insinuation is that, or not insinuation, not here, but your general, MO is, the world is full of these people.
That's not what I've said. I've always said a committed minority. But on the point of these individuals, do you worry that you could be do you worry that you could be exposing your readership or drawing your readership into figures who are considered hateful or posting anti-Semitic views? So someone like Mark Collett, for example, we know that he's attended combat training with former members of what is a now proscribed neo-Nazi organisation like National Action. There are other figures that you've spoken about, for example, people like Graham Hart, who has explicitly made comments that are very offensive and anti-Semitic. Do you worry that by defending those individuals or giving them a platform, you are effectively condoning these kinds of views for your readership, or at the very least advertising these kinds of characters and views to your readership?
Well, we definitely hold our readership in a higher regard than the BBC holds its viewers, because we credit them with the ability to make the same kind of decisions on each piece of information as they go along. It's not, I don't know of anybody who follows somebody, who likes what somebody says on a certain, and then hangs on their every word and believes everything that they say. Now, again, you know, if somebody's going to do that, then that's on them. The information, bad ideas are everywhere. They can be anywhere. They can pick them up from a book.
But these are pretty bad ideas. Like someone like Mark Collett has endorsed Mein Kampf, that's Hitler's book.
Okay.
You know, how do you, as an editor, do you feel responsible for what you put? Because I do think that there's a certain amount of editorial responsibility that we all talk about. How do we make sure that we are giving our readership accurate and fair information, but also that we are not promoting hate or hateful ideas?
Well,
or
we don't promote
anti-Semitism?
hate or hateful ideas.
But you have.
No, we haven't.
So there are examples, for example, in the paper itself, you've recommended books by someone like Eustace Mullins, who's a white supremacist. You've defended Graham Hart.
Eustace Mullins is not a white supremacist, he's a historian.
But he's specifically written books, including ones like The Biological Jew and Adolf Hitler, An Appreciation.
Okay, I've not read that book.
But
Okay,
he is someone who...
we've recommended his book on the Federal Reserve.
Yes, exactly. But he is a figure who is, you've described him as a renowned author in the light. He's a figure who's written several books and who is known for promoting views that are in line with white supremacy and that are offensive to Jewish people, that are anti-Semitic, that promote hate. So do you realise how by endorsing a figure like that, it could expose your readership to kind of further hate and nasty ideas that they are promoting? Why do you include those people?
Well, because the book itself is well worth reading. Now, all you're doing here is guilt by association. Okay,
so what about someone like Graham Hart? So the paper directly defended Graham Hart. He was sentenced to 32 months in prison for making anti-Semitic remarks on his radio show. And in the article about him, there was no mention of those comments. It was suggested that it was just a conversation. But he said things like, Jews are filth, they're like rats, and they deserve to be wiped out.
Yeah, that's pretty harsh stuff.
Yeah, well, why defend someone like that?
We didn't. We defended his right to say it.
But you think it's right for him to for him to spread hate like that, and you think it's right to condone the spreading of hate in that way?
Again, people should be adults and make their own decision. But it's funny that you've said that 3 times now. You've pointed out that article. Do you have this article down?
Yeah, I've seen that article.
Holocaust survivor calls out modern day fascism.
Yeah, I've seen that and I've looked at that.
So,
but that doesn't mean that doesn't.
So we do provide fair and balanced reporting because the world is not sanitised. Yeah, people out there have extreme views. We believe that they should have a right to express them. Not necessarily in our paper all the time. It's a very small paper. It's only once a month. But we believe in free speech. We believe in the right of people to hold ideas, hold thoughts, ideas, and express their views. If we don't have that, if you take that away in one, if you take one iota from that away, we're now down the road of censorship, of thought control. Actually, an interesting question where have you read 1984, and do you see any parallels with what's going on today in terms of the control of information?
I like reading Orwell's work, and I have read 1984. I don't agree with the idea that certainly. That you're kind of implying that the BBC or me or anything like 1984. Again, my job, in some ways, I think that what's happening with disinformation and false ideas is much more similar to people being misled into believing things that are untrue and actually totally distort their worldview to the point where it's causing serious harm to them and people around them.
We couldn't agree more, but unfortunately we disagree that the BBC is the source of all that.
No, I know you do, but that's just not the case.
It's funny because everything that you're saying is absolutely true, but you're saying that the people that oppose the government are the source of all the disinformation. We're saying,
Okay. I'm not saying the people who oppose the government are the
okay.
source of disinformation.
Okay, but what we're saying is, exactly, we agree with you completely, Marianna, disinformation is extremely harmful, gets people to harm themselves, and the BBC and the government. And other news outlets as well, we're not singling you out, all the major corporate and national outlets are all in the same
But
business.
the problem is that your definition of disinformation is different to mine. Mine is that disinformation is contrary to evidence, it's contrary to fact. And what you're saying is that, you know, factual and evidence-based information is actually disinformation.
We're saying that, no, it's not factual, well, you don't have factual or evidence information. The Great Barrington Declaration, how many times did the BBC cover it?
The BBC has covered it.
It was a big thing, yeah, to smear it off. Everything that opposes the government, everything that opposes the narrative is smeared, it's othered, it's associated with, oh, but they also say this, they also think this. It's pure propaganda. And you've actually said yourself, we weaponise the way we do things as well.
I've already explained to you what I meant by that, and you know what I meant by that. But you can keep disagreeing with me. I have another question kind of related to what I was just asking you about before. Talking about the Telegram channel now rather than just the paper.
Okay. I don't even have a smartphone, so I have nothing to do with
I was going to say, do you
channel.
run the Telegram channel? Who runs it?
A couple of people run it. You know what? I contacted Telegram a while ago to see if we could shut it down and what have you, and you can't anyway. So
why do you want to shut it down?
Even if you wanted to. No, I'm just saying, there was with what was going on with it, it was too. Obviously, I couldn't have any control of it either. But we can't. You can't shut it down anyway. So I'd rather have it as it is, with some kind of influence on it. As you well know, Telegram is, it's the Wild West, I suppose, of the internet. I still haven't been on it at all. I don't know how to use it. If we didn't have a semi-official Telegram channel, we wouldn't have. Somebody would do a completely unofficial one and could obviously smear us with all kinds of things.
Are you concerned then that you don't? You said there that you have some oversight of the Telegram channel. Are you concerned about some of the content? So that, for example, there's a neo-Nazi propaganda film, Europa, The Last Battle, that's been published on the channel, and there's lots of use of things like globalist endgame and globalist cabal. There's posts from Tommy Robinson. There's posts from Alpha Men Assemble.
Social media, anybody can post anything.
But those are reshared by the Light on the Telegram channel. So they're, whoever's in charge of the channel is directly sort of retweeting those effectively, putting them in the group.
Again,
how do you feel about that?
We believe in the free sharing of information, and people can make their own minds. They're all adults. Yeah.
What happens if that information could lead to hate or violence?
Okay, well, again, people are adults and they can make up their own minds. If somebody's going to see a film or hear a song or whatever, and they're suddenly going to turn into a violent person, then that person has a problem, nothing to do with any of the external stimuli.
I've spoken to people who are worried about the impact that the Light has had on people they know. They're worried that they now prescribe to views that are more extreme, or far right, or anti-Semitic, and they almost don't even realise that's happened. Do you feel responsible for that?
Darren, just a quick one. There's been about 10 questions your way and none back.
Okay.
Shorter than to start asking questions.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Okay. Do you mind just answering that one?
Yeah, it's going to be the same answer that we've just said. At the end of the day, people have to, and that's part of the thing. People have to take responsibility again for their own lives, for their own actions, for their own thoughts. Again, what the government, the BBC, etc., want people to do is just accept you as the only arbiter of truth. We'll tell you what to think. We'll tell you, what medical things you should do. We'll tell you, we're the arbiters of truth. Don't think for yourself. At no point has the BBC ever, at the end of a news broadcast, ever said you should go and research everything we've just said, because obviously we're fallible like any other news organisation, and we could be completely wrong. You present the facts. You present the information as facts. Let me just show you this, and we're switching over to war, I suppose. Talking about harm. Talking about how disinformation causes harm.
Just so you know, there was that one that you wanted to do from Oracle Film.
Okay. Yeah, we'll circle back to the vaccines in a sec.
It ties in with the book.
Cool. So let's move this along.
International lawyers. Suddenly, the BBC says it was filming a small rural hospital, and a game-changing atrocity happens right there, the moment they were filming.
We were filming the doctors working at this hospital when victims of an incendiary bomb attack on a school playground started pouring in.
Absolute chaos and carnage here. It must be some sort of napalm.
It's a highly sceptical public stayed hostile to military intervention. Exactly 1 month later, the leaders are trying to pin a chemical weapons attack on Syria without success. The BBC airs exactly the same footage but digitally alters the word napalm for, quote, chemical weapons, hoping no one will notice.
Absolute chaos and carnage here. Must be some sort of chemical weapon.
Not only did folks notice, but it unleashed a massive public investigation, which made some extremely disturbing findings.
This is the total fabrication, from beginning to end, of an atrocity with BBC reporter Ian Pannell standing amidst a tableau of very bad actors. This is completely beyond the pale.
This audio analysis by media investigator Robin Upton shows both versions are identical and from the same speech. The BBC then digitally altered the words from napalm to chemical weapon, the exact justification NATO was finding difficult to prove. That game-changing allegation was made by 2 doctors that had travelled with the BBC, who claimed the number of sudden casualties is, quote, overwhelming. What kind of doctor, notes media investigator Robert Stewart, gives interviews when she is surrounded by supposedly seriously burned and dying teenagers?
Get anyone who isn't a patient out of here.
When a nurse does finally start to help, her order to get anyone who isn't a patient out of here doesn't apply to the cameraman. Even worse, notes Stewart, is the bizarre acting which starts when the man in the centre gives the sign.
Look at this.
What do you need to see? Just see human beings.
I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at people because this is obviously terrible acting.
Dr. Roller,
and the BBC.
On whose sole claim the BBC sends napalm chemical weapons allegations around the world, is actually the daughter of Syrian rebel Musa al-Qadi. The parallel to the Gulf War and nurse Naira is stunning. Congressman said the nurse's tearful testimony that Iraqis were killing children swung their vote in favour of war.
Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
Nurse Naira became the mainstream's darling, but once the vote had safely passed, she admitted inventing the whole thing and was actually the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to Washington, lying to get the public to back war. UK member of Parliament.
Okay. So, talking about disinformation and harm, I mean, you know, you can't really, I mean, and you know, the media have got serious form in supporting war drums since I've been alive. I don't know how you can defend that, but I'm sure you're going to. As far as I'm concerned, the BBC, as well as all the media organisations, have deceived people repeatedly to support bombings and war. You know, what do you have to say to the obvious fakery that's going on and being broadcast as an incident and reason for starting war and bombing?
So there's 2 different conflicts you're talking about there. You're talking about Syria and then you're also talking about Iraq.
No, well, the point about the Syria one was it was referring back to the same tactic used by, you know, the United Nations and what have you to
so,
you know, the Iraqis are doing this, we need to go in. Of course, you know what I mean? If people are, you know, using emotion and disinformation to provoke hate.
So with this, first of all, and how I look at stories as well, is thinking about the source of that information. So this is Russia Today, is the source of that information.
But it's actually showing BBC footage.
Yeah, of course it is.
Right.
But I'm just telling you that the report, and I think it's important for people to know, is from Russia Today. Russia Today has form with promoting disinformation, specifically Russian-based disinformation. That's true. And in fact, disinformation that has been argued laid the groundwork for an invasion of Ukraine that has led to the deaths of lots and lots of people. So I think that's important to say. But on this point, and you know that clip there where that it was showing people who
acting.
Those people are not acting.
Sorry, these people in the room here.
No, there's evidence that there were. There's a really good series that the BBC did. It's called Mayday. I'd really recommend you listen to it. It's on Radio 4, and it's all about disinformation tactics used to deny the reality of what was happening in Syria.
This was broadcast on the BBC. I've lost it. I've lost the power. That was broadcast on the BBC in 2013. Right? It's the worst acting I've ever seen in my life. It's clearly.
We don't have to watch it again because it's actually quite disturbing, if I'm honest.
It's not disturbing at all. It's quite clearly zombie acting like this. Yeah. If you can't tell the difference, Marianna, I really don't know what you're doing being a journalist.
Do you believe? Do you believe that
is clearly
attacks the state? Do you ever believe footage of like the Manchester Arena attack? Do you believe that was real?
Guys, it's your turn to ask the question.
And I'm just asking it back because that's happened quite a few times, and I'm interested in if you think that these kinds of attacks are often staged.
Do I think events are staged in order to support wars? Absolutely.
Do you think that terror attacks are staged?
Do we have proof that they're doing? Well, funnily enough, unfortunately, I've just lost the power because I had another clip lined up, which kind of proves, yes, stage and involvement and what have you. We say stage, but we'll obviously have to wait to get it up. Let's move on very quickly. Do you want to play the clip from Safe and Effective first?
Yeah.
What's up? Oh, it's done it. It's back in now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the battery is dead, so we'll have to go through it all again.
And you've got the book there, yeah?
We've got the book.
Let me just get it onto full screen. 1 sec. So this was about Marianna saying everything was backed up by evidence.
Right.
All good?
He's going to play you we'll play you a clip very quickly.
Just make sure that...
Go on, you do.
No, I think it's coming from the street, maybe.
Is it the street?
Yeah, like I think it's below the window, like sort of in the street.
If I can get everyone to just sit quietly for a second, if that's okay, just while you're doing that, when you've done that, when the clicking stops, maybe just get everyone to...
Okay, sorry. History.
Is it actually coming out
that's
of
what
that?
I'm saying. It's definitely from here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 100%.
Even though it's unplugged.
It's unplugged though.
Wow, that might be a plug for the...
Maybe it's for the light.
It's coming through from this door. Do you? Yeah.
No, it's coming out of the speaker.
No, I think it's coming from this ear because I thought it was outside.
I'm pretty sure it's literally on in here.
Yeah, let me just... Excuse me a second.
It's both.
Yeah, it's coming out of here.
Right, it's coming through as well. But I'm only getting on the legs. As long as, are you happy with this?
I'm not really...
That's fine.
That's fine. Don't worry if it's
It's not the end of the world.
We'll just explain we're in the pub. Yeah, exactly. Oh, thank you.
Pull the wires out.
Nice one.
Well done.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, it is.
If I could still ever get everyone just to sit quietly just for like 10 seconds, if that's okay. Just while we're taking a break. That'll do.
Perfect. It's so Phil gets wild tracks, so when he edits the podcast, he can it helps with the kind of background noise, so you can explain, oh, by the way, in the background people are chatting or whatever. Perfect.
So this was about the evidence and the BBC reports on factual evidence and stuff like that, but does it take everything into consideration?
Yeah. So
It's about 3 minutes.
Okay.
Your safety will always come first, and a COVID-19 vaccine will only be approved by us, the UK's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, once it has met robust standards on safety, quality and effectiveness.
I was vaccinated because I'm a carer. I've had all 3 and I had the flu one as well.
As far as the government is concerned, I believe they are doing the best thing for the nation.
I've got an 8-year-old and I just didn't want to catch it where I didn't have to be fair. If this would have prevented me from having it, then it was all good for me. I wanted to go on holiday. I just thought it was better that I get it done. I wanted to protect other people.
The COVID vaccine has been hailed as a medical and logistical success. It's claimed that millions of lives have been saved, but there's growing evidence that the jab can have devastating consequences.
They actually told my wife and 2 children they had no hope, and if I did survive, it would be from the waist up.
I thought I was going to die. I would go to bed at night not thinking I was going to wake up.
Those injured by the vaccine feel unrecognised and abandoned by the NHS and a government they trusted.
You take one for the team, so I took the vaccine, but now the team's running the opposite direction.
Just let people know that when it goes wrong, there's no help at all.
The doctors don't know what to do with us. We're literally keeping each other alive.
Safety is our watchword, and we are globally recognised for requiring the highest standards of safety, quality and effectiveness for any vaccine.
having been double jabbed and being one of the first to take the Pfizer vaccine, I have, after several months, critically appraising the data, speaking to eminent scientists in Oxford, Stanford and Harvard, speaking to 2 investigative medical journalists and being contacted by 2 Pfizer whistleblowers, reluctantly concluded that this vaccine is not completely safe and has unprecedented harms, which leads me to conclude that it needs to be suspended until all the raw data has been released for independent analysis.
Dr. Malhotra is a respected and influential figure in medicine, and he's not alone in calling for the suspension of COVID vaccines. Many more international scientists are alarmed at what's developing into a global issue. I'm John Bowe, and I'm going to shine a light on an issue that cannot be ignored. Millions of COVID vaccine injuries and thousands of deaths are being reported through official channels all across the world. Our government has been accused of covering up the emerging data, and the media of telling only one side of the story. We'll look at how and why. But first and foremost, we give the vaccine injured a voice.
My mum was standing on the drive. She'd been looking after the dogs.
Just keep it going for a couple of minutes, okay?
Away, and she was talking to the neighbour, and I remember getting out of the car, and I burst into tears, and I said, "Please don't be alarmed at how I'm walking." And it was then I really realised, I think after the tremors on the Sunday, that there was something seriously wrong. And I'd been fine up until, I'd been healthy, perfectly fine up until the point of me having my second vaccine.
Breathe. Okay, come on.
It's really funny because I look at these videos and I watch them and I either get really emotional watching them or I just go, wow, look at how far I've come and look at where I was. I was on a Zimmer frame. I was in a wheelchair. I kind of feel like I'm looking at somebody else sometimes. And not me. I still suffer now. I suffer with a lot of fainting. I suffer with my legs giving way. As a result of...
And just as a follow-up to that, I mean, obviously there's hundreds and thousands of stories, but Edward Dowd used to work for BlackRock, so he's definitely not doing it for the money. He made himself a lot of money. He's also an amazing... Oh, sorry, yeah. He's also an amazing analyst, obviously, which is why he got the job he did. This shows you very, 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 very briefly athletes, young athletes, who've all died suddenly. Now, you almost made this into a conspiracy. I mean, it was the press that come up with the died suddenly, and obviously what you're trying to do is belittle it. So, after a systemic review of the literature, the Lausanne study from Switzerland Hospital Lausanne determined there had been 1,101 such cases over a period of 38 years. So, young athletes dropping dead, dying suddenly. That's an average of about 29 per year. These days, we'd be grateful to see a month with only 29 such events. In fact, Since June 2021, there hasn't even been 1 month with fewer than 29 of these sudden deaths. It used to be 29 a year. There were 90 reported in December 2021 alone, and about the same for the month after that. And then finally at the end here, we've got graphs showing COVID deaths for each country and when the vaccine was introduced. Now obviously they're not all like this. Vaccine introduced Thailand, vaccine introduced Malaysia, vaccine introduced Uganda, Nepal, Portugal, okay, what have you, on, Mongolia, Zambia, Paraguay, Bahrain, Uruguay, all over the world, Sri Lanka, Tunisia. Okay, Tunisia obviously had some kind of reporting there, but everything's just gone crazy once the vaccines were introduced. Now, it's absolutely beholden to the media and most politicians that they will never ever admit. But you don't need to be a mega scientist to understand that if one variable changes and that then has an effect, or then the results change after that, it doesn't take an amazingly advanced mind to go, this is causing that.
Can I just ask, what thing do you want me to, because that's a long question, so what thing would you like me to talk about? What's your question?
Well, look, you will still maintain, and the BBC will still maintain, that the vaccines are safe and effective. You will dismiss cases like the one you just saw as extremely rare, when it seems it's around 1 in 1,000 people.
I feel like I'm meant to answer the question. You can't ask me a question that you then answer yourself.
I'm keep asking the question. Okay. You feel free to answer it as soon as you like, because as far as we're concerned, this, along with obviously starting wars, this is another example of massive BBC censorship propaganda, causing serious harm, serious death, and covering it up, refusing to acknowledge that there's a connection when it really doesn't take any kind of analytical mind to go, this procedure was introduced to massive populations and this is now happening. We've got 20% excess deaths. Now, if we had a pandemic in 1920, in 2021, that would be the peak year. Yeah, excess deaths are keeping on rising, and they're still rising now after the vaccinations have been introduced. Now, they were supposed to lower the death rate. Yeah, it should be a lot lower. It should be back to whatever the baseline level is. That 20% is above the previous 5-year baseline. What is causing those deaths, Marianna?
So I kind of want to answer. I mean, that is a really long, as you can imagine, if I'd asked you a question that long, you'd probably be thinking, okay. So I think broadly, and it's worth saying this to begin with, and as I've said lots, I'm here to talk about my journalism, and what I can say, and is the case, is that at the BBC, the health team and teams across the BBC have repeatedly covered the vaccination, they've covered the vaccine rollout, they've covered the side effects, they've covered all kinds of things. They've also covered people who've been injured by the vaccine or have died. And one really recent example is, and that was shown at the start of that video, is someone like the psychologist Stephen Wright, who his wife recently had kind of the confirm that he died due to complications linked to the AstraZeneca jab. No one is denying or has denied that there are real examples. She herself, his wife, said that this was a rare situation, and that's what the majority of evidence shows us, that actually a lot of people have had their vaccinations and they've not been injured and they've not died, and actually the number of people that would and could have died of COVID-19 is really, really high. That's not to say that it's not scary and sad and terrible when people are injured or are hurt, absolutely, but again, and as you predicted, I'd say, that is not the majority of people. That is a small minority. But the BBC, nonetheless, has covered those examples and does cover them. All of these issues, whether it's to do with different countries' rates of death from COVID or vaccines, again, we have a really experienced data team, we have a really experienced health team who spend hours, honestly, the amount of work that goes into unpicking the data and understanding what it means and how it's different in different countries. And there's lots of evidence to suggest that COVID deaths have significantly decreased across the board as a result of the vaccine. And that was the main purpose of that vaccination. And you've shown me lots of graphs there from all kinds of different countries. You haven't shown me the UK's graph, which does not say, which categorically shows how COVID deaths have decreased.
We have 20% excess deaths in this country.
Yeah, so excess deaths. So talking about a different issue. So when it comes to excess deaths, and again, I would say again, I'm not the BBC's health correspondent. I'm the disinformation and social media correspondent. But what I can say is that when it comes to issues like excess deaths, and as people have spoken about, there are all kinds of things. The backlog created by lockdowns, which means people aren't seeing doctors. There was a really recent story about diabetes, for example, and about an increase in. But the problem is that the result, and what a lot of people on the BBC have spoken about and has been covered extensively, is that when people weren't able to see doctors, the amount of time they're then waiting to be able to see doctors again means that there are certain issues, cancers, all kinds of things. As I say, there was a report just the day before yesterday that was all about diabetes. It was all about how there is an increase in people who are becoming really ill or poorly as a result of diabetes, or their diabetes isn't under control because, again, they haven't had access to the services, or and there.
So we're saying lockdowns the cause.
Well, no, I just think that that's one of the byproducts. Excess deaths are complicated, and one of the byproducts, and it's the health team at the BBC whose job it is, and they have extensively covered the ONS figures. They cover them every time that they come out. I know because I see that.
Has there been any suggestion that it may be linked to the vaccine on the BBC?
No, because the evidence doesn't support that idea.
Of course not. How much money did the Bill Gates Foundation give to the BBC?
Again, I get asked this a lot, as you can imagine, and the BBC News operation is very different from BBC Media Action, which is linked to and has received donations from Bill Gates. Those are not. I sometimes think that it's important for people to understand and for you to understand how it works at the BBC. When I decide to investigate a story, report on a story, there is no undue pressure, there is no influence, there is no one telling me to look at a story, there's no one telling me that I can't cover something. That's never happened. I work with really experienced teams, like the one here with me today, like ones from BBC Panorama, from across the BBC, and they are rigorous and they are really good journalists. And everybody works really hard to report on stories, to interrogate the evidence. There's no, the kind of suggestion that someone like Bill Gates is kind of is putting pressure on someone, or the money's putting pressure on someone to put pressure on me. That's just not true. It just doesn't happen like that.
We don't think that.
Well, then why are you saying it if you don't think that?
Well, because the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is heavily invested in vaccines, donates to the BBC. They also donate to a lot of the other organisations, universities, etc., that are also.
But that's because that's their interest.
They were pushing the vaccines, pushing the false information, pushing the disinformation, pushing the fear propaganda to fear people into taking this experimental injection.
So
what you're saying, you've said a lot of words. What you haven't done is answered the question. Okay?
You've said a lot of words.
We say, okay, but I'm trying to ask you a question, and you haven't answered it. We say that the excess mortality is directly caused by the vaccines because it's the one variable that's changed. It's been mass introduced to people. Clearly, people didn't always suddenly drop dead. That would be.
But there are lots of variables.
That would be a thing. Okay, there are lots of variables, but what variable has changed between now and
all kinds of things? Access to medical care, the way that people are able to see doctors or not. Instances of, particularly kids who, and, loads of people have spoken about.
So don't you think, hang on a minute, so are you calling these people liars? Because there's a lot more of those. There's like, how many vaccine injured were at the Truth Be Told thing? Would you say 150? How many? Yeah? I mean, that's not rare.
Okay, I've never.
That's not extremely rare, Marianna. That's a serious problem. See, we have a problem.
Do you mind if I answer the question? Because otherwise it's really hard for me. Because otherwise you ask me a question and then you say lots of other things and I can't answer what you're saying. Okay? I have never ever said that those people are liars. I did not say that. I said to you that the BBC has covered pretty extensively cases where people have been injured or harmed by the vaccine. They've covered those.
Your own Lisa Shaw.
But that exactly.
Although you didn't want to admit it.
Absolutely. No, they don't. They've covered that. That's been covered extensively.
You didn't want to admit it for a while.
Okay.
My husband had to really pressure you.
That's been the BBC have covered that extensively. Again, I can talk about my reporting, but what I can tell you on this topic is that the BBC have covered it extensively, and the majority of people who have had their vaccines, received all their vaccines, have not been injured and are not ill. Okay, that's just true, and therefore it is more rare to have been injured. And this is really important.
But there's a problem with the safety signals there. What you're doing is belittling all those people that have been injured because you're saying, look, we've given out 30 million shots, and only 10,000 of those shots, it's probably more. It's only 1 million of those shots have caused serious injury. So. It could be various other things that.
No, but just because it's rare doesn't mean it's belittling it.
When the swine flu virus, the swine flu vaccine, how many did it? Was it 9?
1 in 50.
Was it
50 people?
It was 50 people. Were with the yellow card scheme, it was just 50 reports, and the vaccine was withdrawn. Now with the yellow card scheme, I mean, it beat that within a week or 2 weeks. But after even like 3 months, we're up to 1,100 reported deaths, a couple of 100,000 adverse reactions. Now, the general stock line back was anybody can fill in those reports. Doesn't mean they actually die from the vaccine. Fair enough. We can all agree with that. Unfortunately, or rather unfortunately, the question then is, hang on a minute, this yellow card scheme is specifically there to recognise early safety signals. There was a problem, nothing got stopped. In fact, you belittle the yellow card scheme, you're the government's only yellow card scheme, everybody's ignored it, it's never been, it was never, I mean, it's too late now anyway because the damage has obviously been done. But after the first couple of weeks, when those safety signals came up, nobody did anything about it. Nobody, the BBC didn't discuss it, the government, everybody poo-pooed it, anybody can fill those reports, they're all false. We need to carry on with the programme.
So, again, to answer your question, it's not belittling something to say that it's rare, that it's a rare occurrence. That is just the truth. That's the evidence that there are fewer examples of that.
So
okay, yeah, so that is rare. You know, it's the way we talk. We define things as rare or common or frequent. That's just how it works, okay? And when it comes to the vaccine, again, the BBC has extensively covered, and I've already said this, has extensively covered the side effects, when there are examples of people, for example, having anaphylaxis reactions. There was loads of coverage of that. The BBC's covered it a lot and reported on it a lot. And actually, there are examples of people wrongly attributing the vaccine to deaths. An example of that would be a front page that was run by the Irish Light, your sister publication. They used the images of 42 people who died, claiming they died suddenly due to being vaccinated. But it later turned out that quite a few of those people had not died due to the vaccines. They died due to other things, drowning, long-term illness, car accidents, suicide, other random events. This was reported to have caused really serious distress to the family, and I've actually reached out to people who've been affected in that way. What's your response to that? Are you actually checking and verifying those stories?
I didn't print that headline.
What do you think of that article then? What's your reaction?
I didn't print the front page.
What do you think of that? Because it's under the Light's name, effectively.
If people, if people don't check properly, I can't be held accountable for that, can I?
Does it worry that it could tarnish your reputation?
It worries me far more that the BBC are ignoring completely, or almost completely ignoring, the serious effects. Now, you mentioned car crash, etc., etc. The point is that people can have heart attacks from these vaccines. It's been proved. They can have problems. They can die suddenly. So obviously, if they're driving a car while that happens, then although it was actually the vaccine, in reality, obviously we can report them as dying as a car crash. See, all that's happening now is it's reversed. So what happened during COVID-19 is that anybody died of anything at all, let's get it down as COVID-19 because we need to create a pandemic and create fear in people's heads. And then we lock them down, and then we say, like exactly as Tony Blair said, your route to freedom is via the vaccine. Yeah, it's a great big marketing scheme, if you like, backed by the government and the official state broadcaster.
I totally appreciate this, and it's I've answered your questions, and I want to answer your questions, but also I do worry that we don't have huge amounts of time. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Would that be all right? Do you have a last question that you want to ask me?
I've got a couple more, but is it relevant to what we're talking about with the?
So my questions are specifically to do with more about democracy, actually, that I want to talk to you about. So we've spoken about vaccines. I've given my response.
You have given your response. It's obviously completely unsatisfactory, and that's okay, but at the end of the day, you have not addressed the excess mortality. You have not addressed obviously the vaccines being the one great major one great big variable that's been introduced to the population.
So I do think I have answered those questions, and I have spoken about the weight of evidence
from a BBC point of view. But 29, it used to be 29 a year. Athletes dying suddenly. Now it's 29.
But there's lots of examples of these are complex cases.
Is increasing. Life is complex. Everything's very complex.
And there are lots of things that contribute to someone dying.
Our problem is that the BBC are not covering this fairly and balanced at all.
Okay, well, I've explained to you how I believe that we are.
People are losing lives.
Okay.
It's the same. We really are two sides of the same coin. You care about the people who've been harmed by online disinformation, by not going along with what the BBC's told them, and we care about the people who have been harmed by going along with what the BBC have told them. So it's the same.
It's not quite the same, but I appreciate what you're saying. But it's not really the same.
You're right. It's not the same because we don't have the same reach as the BBC. We don't have millions of years.
Do you mind if I ask you a question, just because otherwise
let's move on.
Because a lot of these questions are really long, and just otherwise I can't.
One for one. So
but we've just done ages of Darren speaking. Yeah, that has been a long time, and I haven't been able to ask any questions.
Maybe, but she did 10 questions, and then you had.
But it's kind of timing. Like some of these questions.
One for one from now down to
some of these questions are very like. I appreciate it. You want to tell me different evidence, and that's totally fine, and different things you want to talk to me about. But they are long questions, so it's just otherwise I can't. I won't have time to ask the questions.
It's all part of the same thing. But go on, let's move on.
Thank you so much. Okay, no worries. It's just.
It needs to be one for one, Darren, because you just get bombarded like you did before.
Okay.
But I think the difference is that my questions are quite short and these questions are quite long. So the difficulty is that otherwise I don't quite have the time to ask my questions.
Can I ask a really short question then?
Would you mind if I ask one first? While
you're changing the battery.
It's done.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So I've spoken to people who are concerned that the ideas promoted in the light are leading people in their community towards hateful ideologies, some of them which I've described, and are leading them to behave in a more hateful way offline, that they've become aggressive at rallies and that they've been disruptive to local democracy, that they've turned up or shouted at meetings. Are you concerned that you could be dividing these communities and that you could be impacting local democracy?
That's a good question to ask the BBC, though, isn't it? Divide and rule seems to be the tactic of the establishment. The othering of those who won't take the vaccine was a sight to behold from Edwina Currie, Tony Blair. You were making those who refused, who were opposed to government policy and everything that was going on, who could see through it and listen to the doctors who weren't going along with the narrative. We were listening to those guys. So.
But do you worry that you could be causing division?
Right. So the point is that we believe that that's exactly what people were involved with. So we watched that video, and like I said, Edwina Currie, I don't want them to be sitting next to us I don't want them to be next to me on the bar. You shouldn't have your job. No jab, no job. How divisive is that, Marianna? How divisive is it to say, if you don't get this medical procedure, you should become an unperson. You shouldn't be allowed to go out. You shouldn't be allowed to go on holiday. You shouldn't be allowed to work. You shouldn't be allowed any NHS treatment. So, in fact, I can't remember which American comedian, Saturday night comedian in inverted commas. Let's. If you've got heart problems and you've been vaccinated, no problem. And if you've got heart problems and you've not been vaccinated, we're not going to give you treatment. Several people cause for that. Now that is horrible, divisive propaganda, and that's coming from the state broadcaster. Anything we publish, anything we print and publish, might reach a couple of 100,000 people.
But these communities.
And I think that you are far more divisive and far more dangerous to public unity, I suppose, as well.
So in the paper, there are repeated references to democracy. Undermining the concept of democracy and encouraging disruption of local democracy. So in this latest issue, there was a bit where you wrote, the notion we live in a democracy and that a vote means anything is long gone. There are examples of people talking about the bogus game of democracy, or that casting a vote waters the root of evil. And also there's talk of disrupting council meetings, which I've already spoken about. Do you worry that this kind of rhetoric undermines democracy, that it can lead to people no longer believing in democracy, which is ultimately what society is built on?
Wow, that's a big question. Are we undermining democracy? No, we want people. It's going the other way. If you have read the articles, we argue for the upholding of the Constitution. We believe in the rule of law. We believe that most governments, especially in recent times, have been enacting unlawful legislation. They are going against the law of the land. And they are, in fact, are on the wrong side. They are, in fact, the criminals. So, again, we worry that the BBC and other media organisations are causing, the harm and the division and the othering. It's the othering that's it's an old totalitarian technique of making either an individual or group of people seem hateful, seem anti-democratic, anti-social, purely because they refuse to go along with whatever it is the government wants to do. And your journalism is instrumental in that. You have a disinformation unit, and it was set up in March 2020
I started my job before that.
Yeah, you were a reporter before you were a correspondent.
No, I started this specific reporter job before the pandemic.
Okay.
At the beginning of that year. But also, I would say that these communities are telling me that, and by unit, you mean there's a team of experts and specialists that cover social media, that cover disinformation. Yes, that's true. When we're talking about division, these communities aren't finding other things divisive. The division has come from people who continue to hand out the light paper, who continue to rally every week, and who've been quite aggressive to other members of the community, who've targeted them with anti-Semitism, for example, and who directly kind of reference the light in their beliefs. That's what these people are worried about. There's not division from other issues, the other issues you're talking about. That's the division they've witnessed. That's just what they've told me.
I mean, you're obviously going to, label and select, be selective with your examples. In the end, do I worry that people are standing up for their rights, figuring out how the apparatus of government work and challenging it? Do I worry about that? No, I absolutely encourage it. I encourage people to stand up for their individual rights. Take an interest in what their local councils are doing. You said disrupting council meeting. The council organised. Local people said we want a meeting. The council organised it. As it happens, it wasn't a big enough venue, so they moved it. They were very accommodating. It was a really great meeting, and I'd love to see people do that all over the country. Push back against all the Agenda 2030, the Agenda 21 policies that are being brought in by the local councils. And absolutely stand up for their own rights in their own way, because the constitution of this country says that no government can actually tell you what to do. So even though they declare a pandemic and say you've got to lock down, you are under no legal lawful obligation to lock down. Yeah.
You talk a lot about this idea of, I don't know, that you want something like, then you were talking about this idea that you advocate for, you want people to be able to push back against the government, to stand up for themselves. And in the paper I noticed as well, there's talk about alternative systems, alternative ways of working. What do you mean by that? What do you intend to happen? What do you want? What's the aim of all this?
That's a good question. Well, for everybody to be free, right, basically. For us to have non-propaganded information, for the government to be a lot smaller than it is and not to have as much power as it does, and for people to be able to live their lives. Freedom. Freedom, individual choice.
Are you concerned that there is some violent rhetoric and that actually that's not something that could happen in a peaceful way? Because there are quotes I've read in the paper, for example, one that says, from the most recent edition, I condone the use of force only to defend against aggressors, which necessarily means I'm 100% anti-government, since government is always an aggressor. And if that makes me an extremist because I want you to have more freedom than you want for yourself, then so be it. What do you think of a quote like that? Is that, do you endorse violence against the government? Is that what that is?
That's not what he's saying.
So what's he saying?
He's talking about self-defence.
But in what situation would you employ that?
If the government said, right, we want to take your property, or you have to come and lock down, you have to leave your house and come to a vaccination centre. I don't know. It could be a gazillion different scenarios. Obviously, Larkin Rose, who wrote that, is an American, where they have the right to bear arms, and it's obviously a very important part of their philosophy and constitution. So what he's basically saying is, I have the right to self-defence, and we actually all have the right to self-defence as well.
Do you consider yourself an extremist, like what he says?
No, I'm the most normal, boring person you could possibly meet. I really am middle of the road conservative. It's funny because we do get painted as some kind of extremist, anarchist. We want rebel or nothing could be further from the truth. It's actually those people who are involved with world NGOs and directing policies. They meet at the World Economic Forum, the Bilderbergs, etc., etc. those are the people that want to destroy society. Those are the people that want to rip up the fabric of Great Britain, for us to progress away from what's obviously worked for us, from great institutions, to totally corrupt them, to totally blacken their names, so that people will then no longer trust them and will then, do what they do, which is presumably go for, civil unrest and all the rest of it. So we're actually against that. We are completely against that. We want people to follow the Constitution, to uphold the rule of law, to take responsibility for their own lives, and to not let other people interfere, to stand up and say, no, you can't do that. Whether it's the council, whether it's the government, whether it's the BBC.
There are lots of calls to action in the paper, and there's also rhetoric about war, about battle. They're encouraging people to sort of take action, to join the war effort, to even sort of,
join the war effort?
Yeah, that was a Vernon Column article.
Oh, okay.
Join the war effort.
The war effort of information, presumably. He's not actually telling people to get guns and tin hats, right?
No, but a lot of the rhetoric itself is kind of focusing on this idea that you don't just believe what is in the paper, or read it and come up with your own opinion. You should be taking action. You should be doing something. And there's lots of what can you do if you're alarmed, etc., etc. Are you concerned about the impact calling for action could have?
Well, yes, that's why we call for action.
But do you worry that by calling for action and talking about war and battle, that someone who genuinely reads this stuff and actually is really terrified and really frightened, that something bad could happen?
Okay, so, sorry, we want to go back a question. What was the previous question again? I was just about to answer it.
Do you think that calls for action in the paper, for people to take action, to do something, could result in action that is not peaceful?
Of course. I mean, people make their own decisions, and they need to be responsible for their own actions. We don't actually necessarily call for action. We offer a range of, or we show what a lot of other people are doing. So if people are doing homeschool, or if people are doing the challenge in the council, absolutely, people should not be passive and just let the world change around them. Because there is, an agenda and a purpose behind it, and it's not for their own best interests. Our job is simply to point that out. Our job is simply to say there is, there's a problem with what's being told everywhere. Here's some other information. Here's some qualified people, other voices, other people who are making a difference in their own lives. And that's it. It's to give a voice to the alternative, the censored, the cancelled, and the forgotten.
Just one last question before then you can welcome to ask me questions.
You've had 5 or 6.
Yeah, thank you.
I've only got 3 left.
But are you concerned that there could be violence? I mean, one of the posts, for example, that's been shared on the Telegram channel several times is from Alpha Men Assemble. They're a group that the Light Telegram channel has endorsed and promoted on their channel. They talk about join and put an effort to this shit show. Are you sick to death of this effing shit show? It's time we show who rules this country. We can't just sit around, essentially. We need to do something. No protests, no stand in the park, no rebels, no roundabouts, no rambling. Just pure, unadulterated defiance. If you haven't got the minerals or balls, leave now. What do you think about that? That, to me, is encouraging direct action and possibly violent action.
Okay, well, it's not me.
What do you think it's encouraging?
We haven't printed that in the paper.
But why is it on the Telegram channel then?
Well, we've already said we have no control over the Telegram channel.
Do you endorse that?
Anybody can post anything they want, can't they?
But do you see how that could lead to violent action? That could encourage people to take action?
What they called again? The Alpha
Men Assemble group.
Yeah, that sounds like I don't know, but it's not the light paper. It's not my words. It's not my thoughts.
Because I mean, it is ultimately on your Telegram channel, and it is encouraging people to be violent, and so that is quite scary.
No, we're not encouraging people to be violent at all. I've just told you, in fact, we want the opposite of that. We want peaceful non-compliance. You don't have to be violent to say no. That's the most powerful weapon we have. We are in a war of information, or a war of disinformation, quite clearly. Millions of people have realised this. That's why we the light paper is so successful. And they obviously object to being smeared as hateful, extremist, violent, because that is the tactics of the propagandist. Now, you may or may not be aware of it. You're doing things in good faith. But quite clearly, if the government have an agenda, or if very, very powerful people, banking interests, etc., have an agenda, then quite clearly they also have to have a plan to oppose the people who oppose the agenda. And the best way to do that is to smear them and other them, even though, so other people watching will go, yeah, I don't really agree with that, but here's the nice man from the BBC or the nice lady from the BBC telling us, no, those are wrong, we should trust the government, everything's right, there's nothing bad going on. And we should, it's more about trust. It's what you need people to do is blindly trust you. What we need people to do is start thinking for themselves and go, hang on a minute, that goes counter to the narrative. Let me check it out. At the end of every article, we leave links and sources and resources so people can. We're not asking people, unlike the BBC, we're not asking people to take what we do or what we say or what we print on face value. What we ask people to do is take the information and weigh it up for themselves. If it's obviously counter to what the government are telling them, then also think about what are our motives and what are the government's motives. Do we have, can we make billions from selling vaccines? Can we? Do we make billions from taxes? Do we make billions from people being poorly sick? No, the answer is not. No, we don't make any money from anybody's misery. In fact, the better people are, the more responsible they are for their lives, the more likely they are to get involved with the lightpaper and take action in their own lives and turn it around. We want a better life for people, and we really believe that the establishment, the news organisations, and the government are actively trying to have people become passive, accepting, economic functioning units rather than individual people.
Would you ask a group like Alpha Men Assemble to no longer, would you ask whoever's running the channel to no longer share that?
I wouldn't ask anybody to do anything.
Even if the consequence you were kind of thinking, well, we don't actually endorse that. Because it sounds to me like you don't endorse it, so then why do you allow it?
Well, it's not a case of allowing it, is it?
But it's in the name of the publication. And some of the posts are signed off with Darren XXX and things like that.
Well, if that's if my post if it's my post, then tell me my words and I'll defend them.
No, but as in you're present in the Telegram channel.
What you keep doing, Marianna, is putting somebody else's words in my mouth and asking me to defend them, and I'm not going to do it.
Well, no, it's just because you're the editor of the paper and you are clearly a name that crops up in the Telegram channel lots because some of the posts are from you. So I'm just interested in why the channel is sharing that kind of content if you say that it's not what you endorse.
Okay, you've asked the same question 4 or 5 times, so it's my turn now. Which has caused more, and it's a really short one.
Sorry, can I just change out the batteries?
Okay, sure, yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
thank you.
Let's hold it.
We're nearly done. I've just got a couple.
I've got one. We've done the 1984 one.
This is a very hard chair. I'm trying to sit on a cushion.
I got the couch. You're hearing that in triplicate.
While we're waiting for him to come back, actually, I might just get that. Get the squeak. I'm going to record if everybody could just be quiet until Stephen comes back through, just so I can get that squeaky door, if that's all right. Thank you. The glamour. Oh, I missed it. Might have to just do it again. Stephen, could you just go and open that door again quickly in 5 seconds? So whichever door you just came from, could you please just do that? Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Wait 1 second. Wait, please close this. Wait, just give it 10 seconds, okay? Sorry, Darren, could you not flick any pages just while we're doing that? Sorry, Stephen, could you do it one more time?
One more time.
Give it 5 seconds.
5 seconds.
Yeah. Sorry, thank you. Great, thank you so much. Sorry,
Becoming useful sometimes.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
All good?
Are we all rolling?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice short question this time.
It's okay. I don't mind the long question.
Which have caused more death, suffering, and hardship throughout history? Governments and corporations, or individual people?
So I think that it's totally right to point out how there is government corruption, how bad things happen and bad people do bad things and harm people, absolutely. And I think what is at the heart of all journalism, especially investigative journalism, is holding power to account. A lot of the reporting I do is about holding the social media companies to account. They are some of the biggest corporations that exist right now. They are rich, they are big, they have lots of influence, and it's important that we hold those people to account and that we ask them questions and that we show where they are causing harm to people. I think that the BBC, and I can't speak on behalf of my colleagues, but the politics team, for example, who are some really accomplished journalists and reporters, hold to account the government and do that in interviews and frequently get the opportunity to ask people questions. I think that it's really important that journalism does that and that it interrogates wrongdoing by powerful people whenever it can.
Okay. This is, I mean... So, well, you didn't quite answer the question, but, is it individuals? I mean, are you agreeing with me? Is it individual people or small groups or governments and corporations that have caused far more killings and pollution and, just general crimes against humanity? It is a government and corporation. I mean, you could take the Soviet Union killed, is it 100 million people? Hitler's supposed to have killed around 20 million people. Obviously, we've got Pfizer themselves were fined, was it $2.3 billion for obviously serious negligence, medical negligence. Are there examples of individuals outside of government corporations, just individual people like me or you? Are there examples of those of those people committing as much harm?
So I agree with the premise that powerful governments, institutions, corporations can cause serious harm and have in history done that. I agree that there's abuse of power, there's corruption. I totally agree on that. Okay. And as an investigative reporter, part of my job is interrogating that. And that's part of the job. So BBC Panorama, for example, who I work with frequently, they are absolutely people who frequently expose wrongdoing, hold power to account, make sure that that we are properly interrogating what's happening and asking questions. But part of what I do is understanding how very powerful people can promote disinformation and not very powerful people can promote disinformation, and the harm caused can play out in different ways. And that's my job, that's what I cover, and it's really important.
And it's completely proportional, let's face it. If I write a post on social media and it's complete nonsense or what have you, it has a very, very limited reach. If the BBC broadcasts that there is a pandemic or that there's been this atrocity in Syria or what have you...
But there's evidence to support those things.
That has far bigger implications, but you're assuming that you're correct, and we're saying that you're not.
But do you realise
we've showed you a video, okay? We've showed you a video of clear, deceptive reporting, changing of audio, seriously, obviously fake acting with fake blood and all. I mean, etc., etc. So, the idea that the BBC is the arbiter, that's where you're coming from all the time. It's like, we can't be wrong, we must be right.
That's not true, by the way. The BBC has on various occasions apologised for getting things wrong.
I know it had to apologise about faking a chemical attack in Syria.
It's apologised for all sorts of things, but I think what's important here is that what I do is understanding the way that disinformation can cause serious harm to people. And it might just be one video or one post, but, I've sat down with Manchester Arena survivors in tears because of the impact this has had on them. They are frightened to leave their house. They are scared. They, denying experiences that people live through in that way is terrifying. And so it's really important as part of my job to understand the way that one post or one video or one message can cause very serious harm. I don't know, to me it seems like you are a compassionate person and you care about people. Mm-hmm. Do you not realise, like, for example, the poor families of the people who the Irish Light said that they died of the vaccine and then they hadn't, do you realise that that's really sort of upsetting and distressing for them? Do you care about those people? Do you care about the Manchester Arena survivors?
We care about all people.
But then do you understand why reporting like I do is important for those people?
Well... obviously, like you said, we're all compassionate people, and nobody likes to be called a liar. But I suppose if those families, if the victim's taken the vaccine and those families deny that it's the vaccine, then again that's the medical evidence. It's an argument for debate. At the end of the day, you keep saying established science, consensus, medical evidence, etc., etc. We've shown you a whole bunch, and we could keep going, obviously, in the paper. Lots of science, lots of reports from the BMJ, from trusted institutions that absolutely go against everything that the BBC promotes. But here's the other part of that question, if you like. Here's the second part of that question, and you kind of already answered it, but you haven't. But given that corporations and governments obviously do far more harm, whether intending to or not, than any individual, how come you don't go after? That's not just you, but the BBC. They never go after these powerful institutions. They never go after.
They do. Do you remember the Prince Andrew interview?
They pretend to.
But that wasn't pretend. That was real. That was a real accountability interview.
Right, and
that
what
had
happened?
A huge amount of impact.
And what happened?
Well, the BBC
Nothing.
aren't in control of the royal family, but what they certainly did do was create a huge.
You could keep it up. Either Prince Andrew went with an underage prostitute, a trafficked girl, or he didn't, and he's quite obviously didn't because they paid a lot of money to keep it out of court. But he's now given it. Okay, he's disappeared from public view.
But the BBC played an instrumental role in really putting that into the spotlight. The BBC's interview was critically acclaimed. It was brave. It asked difficult questions of someone very powerful. The BBC does that loads. They interview people and they ask them difficult questions, and I just don't think that's deniable.
I think they pretend to. I think the
How
BBC.
do they pretend to? Did you watch it?
That was one interview.
But there's loads of interviews. There are loads of examples of interviews with politicians, prime ministers.
When have you gone after Pfizer?
There have been
when
an
have you
interview
gone after
with
Matt Hancock over the Twitter files?
There have been loads of interviews with Matt Hancock. There have been loads of questions asked about him and the way he handled the pandemic. There's been loads of coverage of Partygate. I can't speak for my colleagues, but I can say that they have extensively covered these issues, and they do ask powerful people difficult questions. And I do that. I interview social media companies. I'm trying to ask difficult questions to someone like Elon Musk. I'm trying to ask difficult questions to the bosses of all the social media companies and to hold them to account for harm that is spread on their platform.
Is the thrust there to therefore, it seems like the thrust is to help the online censorship bill, which is not just happening in this country, it's happening across the world. So it seems like a lot of thrust of your journalism is to talk about these harm, talk about the abuse, talk about the hateful people who are there on the internet, but we all have a block button so we don't have to deal with it, and there's also the police for when people go over the top. But at the end of the day, companies, corporations, banking system, governments, all the big powerful institutions are all involved in propaganda and disinformation. It's been proved. If we look in the past, we talk about history, go, oh yes, we had propaganda, our enemy had propaganda. Well, that somehow doesn't happen today. All of a sudden, nobody's involved in propaganda.
But that's not true.
Not so nobody, but no state actors, no big actors. Pfizer have the biggest find in American history, but we should all suddenly trust them. Yeah, we have the Gelman amnesia effects, whereby if you yourself have a knowledge of a certain area, you'll watch your news report and you go, that's absolutely nonsense. I know that's nonsense. The next news report is about some other topic, and we somehow trust it. But as you saw at the point with individuals, if somebody says something fake or false, or that turns out not to be true, then the idea is that we should completely discredit anything else that they say.
So just to come back to when you said, we never say that governments spread disinformation or propaganda. We often hold to account. We fact check politicians when they say things wrong, they get things wrong. We hold You're right.
Yeah, sorry, just that noise.
Is it a problem? Is it a problem or not a problem?
Carry on.
Sure?
Yeah.
Okay. We hold politicians to account. We make sure that and that's across the board. We hold American politicians to account. There's loads of examples. I did a whole podcast series called The War on Truth, which was about understanding the way that Russian disinformation tactics were denying atrocities there, and also looking and interrogating examples of disinformation from Ukraine's side. But obviously the majority of the disinformation was coming from Russia's side. So we spend a lot of time thinking about state actors promoting disinformation and covering it and investigating it. And I think that it's important for people to understand that That's something that the BBC do all the time, and I just don't think it's fair to say that that doesn't happen. And you're right to say that corruption exists and bad things happen, but that doesn't make the more extreme conspiracy theories suggesting things are totally true, or that there's, massive elite cabals of people who are involved in orchestrating harm, the same as real legitimate examples of corruption. Those two things are different. It can make you more inclined to believe they exist, absolutely, but it doesn't make them true.
Well, one does come from the other.
Yeah, but it doesn't make them true. That's the problem, is that you can't, it doesn't...
Each one has to be independently assessed and verified.
Yeah, I agree.
Let me play the one more clip that I wanted to play regarding BBC, disinformation, world events. Sorry, it's back to a question we had much earlier, but okay. So 9/11, obviously a pivotal moment in a pivotal event in modern history. Everybody remembers the Twin Towers, the two towers going down. It was a major part of the day.
It's not very healthy.
This here is the Salomon Brothers building, World Trade Center 7.
There's something many people do because it's simply too painful.
You would have only been 4 or 5 at the time. 6.
I remember it's the first big news event. I remember.
So we've got Philip. What's his second? Kendall.
This was not a result of a new attack.
This is at 4:57. The BBC first reported it. At 0:00 it repeats it obviously on the hour for the news.
Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
So it's been collapsed. It's collapsed.
The details are very, very sketchy. As you can see behind me,
is the building still standing?
Is still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that is an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city.
5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because they don't really know where to turn. That's the very sad thing. I think there's going to be a lot of very, very traumatised people that has hit them very, very hard.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched.
Not quite finished yet.
I was wondering what it felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line.
Oh, we've lost the signal. At 57, we'll come back. Convenient time for video link to go down because somebody's clocked, finally, that the building's still there, but the BBC are reporting it has happened collapsed. Now, that's a serious mistake. Philip's there on the video screen. You can see it behind her. There we go. Now, 20 minutes later, at 20 past 5, the building actually collapses. So the BBC had the news 23 minutes before. I don't understand that. I mean, doesn't it work like, okay, here's the newsroom, right, here's a report come in, building's collapsed, all right, everything goes into, what have you, let's get this ready. Nobody looks at the screen and goes, okay, it hasn't collapsed, or nobody rings New York and goes, it hasn't collapsed at all. So what it looks like to us from that is a script. So the BBC knew that the World Trade Center 7 building was going to collapse. They knew it was going to collapse, or they had a report that it had collapsed. So obviously, and then it collapses 23 minutes later. How is that possible?
So as you rightly pointed out, I was in year 1, 6 years old when this happened. So I was not at the BBC. But the BBC has responded quite extensively about this clip and spoken about it before. Cool. And rightly said that they are not part of a conspiracy and that no one told them what to say or what to do. They've explained how this was a situation where there was chaos and confusion, and there were things that said that then turned out to be untrue or inaccurate, but that was based on the best information they had at the time, and they always tried to source their reports and used qualifying words. No, but I think it's really important to think about the context in which this is unfolding. It was unprecedented. It was absolute chaos.
The main buildings had gone down 6 or 7 hours before.
I know, but what's important to understand in rolling news events, the BBC admitted that they'd made a mistake, that they said that, but that doesn't mean that you're jumping to the conclusion that they've therefore been told to say that somehow in advance. And I think sometimes there's a real overestimation of what people are doing. You're suggesting without evidence...
You're not nefarious. It's not nefarious. This isn't a conspiracy. This is just total incompetence.
Well, I think it's a situation, as they've themselves said,
where,
such
an important thing.
Again, I wasn't at the BBC at this time, and I can only talk about my journalism.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm talking about someone else's journalism here.
Yeah.
But as they've said, the reporter involved said she didn't minute by minute remember what she'd said. Like everyone else, she was trying to make sense of what was going on, what she was being told, what was happening.
It's right here.
Jane Stanley.
No, sorry.
We're going to
here we go.
Jane Stanley was a world affairs specialist and had just arrived in New York.
So it's exactly what he said.
Found a place to interview her, but she had
it was all rushed and fair enough, yeah.
I was thrown, not a question, but a statement of fact. I don't know where that came from.
Jane, what more can you tell us about this collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. I mean, it's very, very difficult being in that position where you've got no communications, no access to information, and that just comes out of left field. Details are very, very sketchy. It was very upsetting about a year ago because of the level of personal...
And then you got Philip facing her with the building behind her, and then you've got producers and a whole crew on presumably both sides of the Atlantic also looking at this thing going,
I think we've lost the line.
The building's still there, you better cut the feed.
So, I mean, given what was going on, it's not very...
But they didn't say we've made a mistake.
But that's because at the moment, in that real time, I think they were probably had... So, I mean, again, I can't speak on behalf of people who were doing this when I was 6 years old.
I get it. But I'm showing you as if for the first time.
What I can tell you, it's not for the first time. I've seen this loads. This gets mentioned to me loads.
Right, okay.
And what I always say is that the BBC admitted, as you just heard from the reporter involved, that it was chaotic and errors were made. But, I mean, the important thing here, and the important thing that happened here was that there was a terror attack that was terrifying and that killed a really significant number of people.
But when it comes to journalism and reporting, we have to be accurate.
But you've just told me that you don't always verify. You said, sometimes things might not be. I'm not sure if you said the whistleblower. We said, well, we didn't meet the whistleblower. We're not sure if it's true.
We are taking his word for it. But if there were obviously problems with it, that would also come to light as well before we published it. In other words, this guy, it would come out. This guy is just making things up.
But there are lots of claims in the paper that are contrary to evidence. Hang
on a minute.
There are lots of examples of that.
Hang on a minute. We're moving on from this. You're saying
this is not an example of them staging 9/11.
It was horrible incompetence by the BBC. We really are a terrible news organisation because, let's face it, looking at a building and seeing it's still there and reporting that it's collapsed is a major distinction between what we see in terms of evidence and in terms of reporting. But the point is, you're saying, okay, well, it was a mistake. At what point did they admit the mistake? 2 years later, when everybody noticed. They didn't admit the mistake right there and there. They didn't say, we've just had Jane Stanley on from New York. The building's still there. We're terribly sorry, everybody. It's a rare example of the BBC. There was no mea culpa. It was just cover it up, move on, cut the feed, and now, we made a mistake, They knew that building, or somebody somewhere, obviously...
But you don't have any evidence that they knew that the building... that just doesn't...
Yeah, they reported it as collapsed.
Yeah, but
where did the reports come from?
There'll be people who were talking, as they explained in that article, who are talking to different sources, who are understanding what's going on.
It's a big building right in the middle of New York, right where there's been a terror attack. It's either there or it isn't. There's thousands of people who can see it, and then there's millions of people who can see it right there on the TV.
Have you ever been in an unfolding news situation like that? Have you ever been in a studio? Have you ever covered a story like that? Have you ever been in that situation? Because I don't think you understand how it works.
I understand if it was just Jane Stanley and she's just there and I thought this.
But often there are situations
You've got a whole team. You've got a whole team behind you. If you were saying something that was obviously false or what have you, one of these guys would go, "You're wrong there. We need to get this right because it's important that you get facts and evidence right."
Okay. The issue is, as she explained, and actually I think, again, I can't answer questions on behalf of people who I've never even met and I don't know. All I can tell you is that what they've said is that it was an unfolding situation, it was really chaotic, and therefore things were said that were mistaken and wrong, and they were sorry about it. That's all I can say, But broadly, the coverage of 9/11 was accurate and fair, and it covered something that was unprecedented at the time.
They never said it on screen, and they very rarely do. What the BBC do often, especially with online reports, is make accusations, allegations, and then quietly retract them.
But what about you? Because there are things in here, there are bits of the paper that make claims and suggestions that are just that are contrary to fact. If you look at, for example,
they're not contrary to fact; they're contrary to the narrative that you want to put out.
But that's just not true. So, for example, in the latest issue, there's a line. It says, "We don't vote." It said that's not true. We don't vote for authoritarianism in the guise of public health. Coercive mass injections of untested medical products. Road closures for a dubious climate crisis. There's lots of evidence that there's a climate crisis. manufactured food shortages. Well, we know lots of the reasons that there have been food shortages linked to war, linked to political decisions, linked to all sorts of things. Unlimited illegal immigration, constant promotion of gender ideology, critical race theory, and the destruction of our heritage. We didn't vote, blah, 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 blah. There's talk about Agenda 21. There's talk about, lots of theories that, like, explain Agenda 21 for someone who doesn't get it. There's not a lot of these things. You're jumping to conclusions. So you're saying, oh, this, for example, oh, they've said this and they got it wrong, so that must mean it's a conspiracy. Or this has happened and this has been said, so that must mean that it's part of a plan. But there just doesn't, to me, seem to be the evidence to back up that idea.
We want people to ask the questions for themselves, that's all. Examine the evidence for yourselves. We're never going to convince each other, obviously. But what I would like people to do, if they hear this podcast or watch the videos, is go have a look for themselves at these things and make their own mind up. We're not saying, this is, I mean, we obviously hold the opinion that it is, but we're not saying everybody else must believe this. Otherwise, there's something wrong with you. You're an extremist. You're hateful. You're a conspiracy theorist. We're saying that there are always at least two sides to a story, and people should absolutely check the information for themselves. Start critically thinking about information, asking questions. Now, on a single incident or a single event or a single thing, it's hard to do. But what happens, as we've tried to do in a very short time, is a weight of evidence builds up. So the BBC are caught lying and propagandising and doing disinformation several times several hundreds of times in fact. But obviously, it has the authority and the power and the establishment and the reach and the backup and the money to be able to brush things under the carpet, move along, say, it was an honest mistake. I mean, it doesn't stop. It doesn't stop the like I say. We accuse you of exactly what you're accusing individuals of doing, is of holding harmful views, of spreading disinformation and propaganda. Of not allowing people to make their own choices and be free and to live their best lives. We think you are, you masquerade as a neutral, independent broadcaster, but you never really criticise the government, the corporations, the banking system. You might do individuals here and there or little bits, but not the actual underlying thing like we do. On the contrary, by your own admission, the BBC is fully engaged in manipulative propaganda. It's been proven to lie and deceive the public in order.
That's just not true. What do you mean by my own admission? That's just not true.
You're engaged in manipulative propaganda. You've said
no.
you're going to watch,
I said that's the way that we engage audiences. Yeah, we should weaponise being able to make people engage with true stories.
By taking emotional stories and getting people to react.
You're manipulating what I've said. You're manipulating what I've said to make it say what you want it to say. But what I've said...
They're your words.
Yeah, but I've explained to you what it means.
We have to weaponise those same tactics in the journalism that we do.
Yeah, and I've explained to you what that means.
So you use manipulative propaganda.
But what that means...
To get people... No, because you want people to believe because we want people to believe what you're telling them.
No, that's not true.
That's why you will manipulate them, of course.
That is based on truth. Like, this is about... I'm not manipulating people by showing them how... people who've been harmed by disinformation are hurt and exposing that. All I'm saying is that, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are being misled to believe things that are contrary to evidence that can do serious harm to them. And it's important that we're able to engage people and that they can understand the evidence and the way that harmful mistruths can hurt people and can damage society. And I think ultimately, and the thing that really strikes me...
We're in the same business.
But the thing that really strikes... But that's it. The thing that strikes me about this conversation is society and democracy are built on this idea that we share a reality, that ultimately we can both look outside and say the sky is grey. We know the sky is grey. I might say the sky looks ugly. You might say the sky looks beautiful. But we agree on the kind of factual basis by which the world is constructed. What's really hard is that, to me, it feels like we're talking from two entirely different scripts. It feels like the reality. Yeah, well, it feels like this shared reality, this shared idea that we, it feels like it's being subverted to me, and that's really dangerous and worrying, because if we can no longer work off the basis of, right, okay, we can disagree on an issue, but we fundamentally agree that it's real and true and it's happening. That's very difficult, because then people are believing and seeing things that just aren't true, or that are not happening or are not the case.
Which we absolutely accuse you of doing with helping create a pandemic.
Do you mind if I ask you just? There's a couple more questions I have left.
Okay, I only have one left.
Okay, fine. I've just got a few more. One is just coming back to what we were talking about before when we were talking about this issue of people taking action offline. One of the things we've been looking at is the way that calls to action can have an impact on people. And there's some research that's conducted by King's College, and it asks people about whether they attend rallies, whether they attend rallies opposing lockdown measures or opposing vaccinations, opposing 15-minute cities, for example, low traffic neighbourhoods, whether they oppose government and media and misinformation. And of the people who attended those rallies, across the board, an average of 61.5% of people said that they think violence is justified at those rallies. What do you think about that? Do you think that violence is justified? And what do you think?
Well, it's funny because the only violence that I saw at those all those marches and rallies was instigated by the police. We had several very peaceful marches, several 100,000 people. There was one time we told you about in Trafalgar Square, where we were there for hours. The police came in at the end of the day, just after David Icke had finished speaking, and started just beating people up. Why they chose to do that at the end of the rally, at the end of the event, I don't know. Similarly, there was another peaceful event. We ended up in Hyde Park. I think there was a band there as well. And, there's footage of the police coming in and being violent towards people who are simply, peacefully not complying with the government. So really the violence comes from the police, the violence comes from the government.
But these are people who are part of the protest saying they think that violence is justified on behalf of the protesters, that protesters can and should be violent. That's what they're saying. These are people who actually attend the rallies, who believe in these causes. Okay. What do you think about that?
I don't agree with violence. I don't think we need to be violent in any way, shape or form. I'm a very big proponent of peaceful non-compliance.
Isn't there a bit
I think, like I say, I think the violence is absolutely coming from the police. We had a march in Bristol. As soon as somebody stopped, all the police would jump on them. And violently arrest them. Hundreds of people have been violently arrested for peacefully protesting and not wanting to go along with the government. So really, again, your spotlight. The idea is to turn the spotlight on the odd individual who will be angry, who will call for violence, who may well be violent, what have you. We live in a very, very society, whereas. The amount, as we've said, the amount of harm and war and murder and pollution and all the rest of it caused by governments and corporations and banks far outweighs like a mountain to a molehill anything that any individual does. So that's why our focus is on exposing government corruption and corporate crimes, and maybe why your focus is on, exposing or attacking the individuals that are against the narrative, against the government narratives.
There seems to me to be a bit of a disconnect between, saying that you don't want violence and that you don't, you want to be peaceful and you don't want it to be like that. But then some of the ideas that are connected to individuals who's featured in the paper or posts on the Telegram, they are. And it surprises me if that's what you think, why you don't say there's no place for violence in our movement, and so we don't include these kinds of people in the paper and we don't allow them to share their posts on the Telegram channels.
Because I might be wrong.
So you think violence is justified?
No, I don't, but I might be wrong.
But the problem is that I guess an issue of violence isn't really about wrong or right, is it? It's about saying, if you on principle agree that violence is not necessary and people shouldn't be violent, I don't quite understand how you think you might be wrong. In what scenario could you be wrong?
I have no idea. I could be wrong on anything, and if we don't hold that attitude as journalists. Or as truth investigators or researchers or what have you, then you're going to come a cropper, because we all have cognitive biases, we all have preferential biases, what have you, and if you're not aware of them, then you're always going to, not always, but you open yourself up to being wrong about things. I have no qualms about admitting if I've been wrong in the past or what have you, and it could be the other way. I mean. Right now I am, like I say, non-violent, peaceful non-compliance is all we actually need. As soon as people stop complying, stop watching the BBC and believing your disinformation, and get on with their own lives, decide for themselves what is true, based on facts and evidence as they go along, then the world would be a far better place. If there was no mass media, you wouldn't be able to have mass events. You wouldn't be able to do the kind of things that you wouldn't be able to have a mass pandemic without mass media. So it serves as a very, very useful tool for those who do want to destroy society and build it back up in their own image. And as I've said, we are absolutely on the side of the people who want to preserve our traditions, our constitution, live peaceful lives, shrink back the government because it has far too much power, far too much say in people's lives, as do the media with their influence as well. If you took it all away tomorrow, like big media, big government, big pharma, big tech, etc., do you think society would collapse? Or do you think people would just get on with it and get on with it?
I think some of it's to do with structures, isn't it? Like I said, society is sort of built on these structures. Democracy, the ideas of, institutions that allow society to function. And so I think that society would be pretty complicated if everything suddenly disappeared. I think it would be more out of control. I don't know, is that what you advocate for? Do you think there should be none of those structures?
No, what I'm saying is we should go back to the Constitution. The Constitution says that the government has almost no power whatsoever. And the police, the constabulary was set up by Robert Peel to prevent crime, to be on the streets to prevent street crime. Now they are remotely trying to prevent pre-crime, almost. It's a very, very different world. We are moving rapidly away from, the setup and situations that serve us best. And you at the BBC are instrumental in doing that as well. Like I say, you have no qualms about being wrong. You don't think you're wrong at all. There's no possibility that you're wrong. And here's the difference between us: that on any particular issue or what have you, I could be wrong. I mean, I'll obviously do my best to check the information, research information, check with what have you that we're as accurate as possible. And where it's not, we will obviously print retractions and what have you. Nobody has yet, the SARS-CoV-2 virus has never been isolated. We've got excess mortality. The vaccines are killing people. Obviously, we're now pushing this saying the climate change thing is real. It's just the weather. Since 2015, we have put 21 trillion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere, and according to NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric, the official weather people in America have said temperatures have gone just down slightly in the last 7-8 years. So if CO2 causes global warming, where's the warming?
Can I pause you there quickly? Just one more batch of change.
Okay, perfect. Then we're nearly done.
I need a pee.
Okay, you go to the loo. And my bum's gone numb from this chair. Everyone's been so loo break. Then we're nearly done.
Okay.
Slide.
Just slide. Just slide.
I'm just going to do these. I'm going to do these. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. Okay, I'll do that as in the last one as well.
Just get him to explain.
Overview. Yeah, or yeah.
And also following that logic.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, my bum is so numb. Maybe I'll stand up. I know I should have gone for a comfy one. No, it's fine. It's just you realise you sit in these chairs and you've been on one. They're quite like they're quite numbing.
Very still as well.
Yeah. Oh. Right.
You're all right, Olivia, standing? Yeah, I'm good.
You're like one of those standing desk people.
Yeah. Yeah, you get rubber soles by the end of it.
Yeah. So you don't mind it.
On the climate change thing, don't forget that she's just swung off to America in a plane. So
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll do the questions, then I'll say they're sort of little pickups on things.
Squeak, 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 squeak.
It's no noise, isn't it?
I know there are lots of squeaky doors.
Right, we won't do another interview here, Ed.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Good. Right, nearly done.
Right, yes.
Hang on, now that we've been moving around, let me just check where your mic is because I'm getting a lot of feedback.
Okay.
Don't worry, I didn't listen there when you went. Where is
We often have to say that to people that you don't listen when they go to the
Your
loo.
pack is on this side.
Yeah.
No, is that yours?
We had that recently with someone I was interviewing for the TikTok.
Oh my word.
He was like, can you please turn it off when I go to the loo? And we were like, yeah, of course.
Yeah. And then I can just pop it there if you want, because then sitting on it we avoid it, otherwise being smushed. Let's check that's back to normal. Yeah. All right.
We've just come back from America, so remarkably I'm not too jet lagged. Okay.
You've just come back from America?
Yeah.
How's that done for CO2 emissions?
Well, it
doesn't matter so much because the temperature doesn't go up because of CO2.
No, it's for an investigation about TikTok actually.
Okay.
And the TikTok algorithm. Anyway, okay. So in response to what you were just saying, I was going to ask you. A lot of the language you use is quite American. You'll often talk about like the Constitution or some of these ideas, and I noticed that in the world of social media that, you know, a lot of the movements that exist on Telegram, they have members from the UK, there'll also be people from America, from all over the world. What was your reaction to the riots at the Capitol in the US? Because they in some ways were inspired by a lot of what you're talking about here. People believing that, you know, votes are rigged or that stuff is not fair anymore and it's not happening in the way that is in their interests. And what do you think about those riots? And do you ever think that something like the Capitol riots could happen here?
I suppose if the police were tipped off to let people into Parliament and open doors for them, then yeah. We have seen that footage, haven't we?
Yeah, so you believe that the Capitol riots were not Trump supporters or the Proud Boys or QAnon supporters?
Yeah, but it was you know, it was an inside job again, you know. Look, in Britain, yeah, if a bunch of people, you know, like you suggest, went down to Parliament or Downing Street or what have you, and were really like, you know, we're going to get you, the police would just shoot them. So if they're going to do that in Britain, you know, why wouldn't they do it in America? They have zero tolerance for it. So the idea was to obviously, you know, and I don't believe in any politician, to be honest, but the idea was obviously to smear Trump and his supporters, and you know, it part of the narrative. At the end of the day, you know, quite clearly political manoeuvres, you know. So yeah, you know, and again, you know, if that's the quote you want, but I believe in peaceful non-compliance. I don't believe that violence can ever will ever solve ultimately issues. Now, might you have to stand up with determination to defend yourself? Absolutely. But that's as far as we need to go, because, you know, it's the rulers that want to change the world. We want things to stay the same. That's the idea of, you know, and you call the Constitution an American idea, but the Constitution is British. We have a British Constitution. It's across several documents. We don't have one document that says this is the Constitution. It's across several constitutional documents. And the Americans took that from us. So it's a very British thing to have a Magna Carta and a Bill of Rights to codify. Although these are ancient and you don't need them on a piece of paper because you have rights by being alive. Nobody can interfere with you, and that you know, without your consent. And that should also extend to government and banks and corporations as well. Nobody should have the right to interfere with you. And that's a very British thing, actually. I think we stand for freedom. We stand for the rule of law. We stand for, you know, as you say, holding power to account, going after corruption. But we, you know, going back to your very first question, why did the light paper start? We don't feel like you guys are doing a particularly good job of it. In fact, we think you're an arm, whether you know it or not. You're helping carry out the agenda against the people to their detriment.
When it comes to this is kind of following up. Last question. Can I have two more questions?
Go.
Because one of them is there's a couple of sort of like pickups on things you've said already that I just wanted to ask you a tiny bit more about. Which one should I ask you? Just on that point, I guess. So, you know, you think that we're doing a bad job and you don't agree with the journalism we do. Talk me through, and you started to do it before, but talk me through the editorial process. You know, how do you go about receiving an article, and then, you know, at the BBC we have lots of editorial processes, how we check that journalism is rigorous, how we ensure that we're adhering to editorial guidelines, all of that kind of stuff. How do you talk me through your editorial process? How do you go about you know, dealing with what you're putting in the paper?
Yeah,
and printing it?
there's a three-stage process. So I will people will send the articles, we'll have an initial look over them, I'll send them round, and we'll obviously pick the ones that we're doing, put the paper together, then it gets sub-edited. So again, checking for legal, etc., and then it gets proofread as well. So you know, obviously links and factual information, etc. So there's quite a three-stage process.
And how long does it take to put it all together?
Well, a month. Yeah, I mean, it's right until the last day. Yeah, we try to, you know, go over things, check things, etc. Because although we have a small reach, we're not, you know, a national broadcaster, we still take great pride in producing a quality paper that's nice to read, but also the content and the information, because we don't want to mislead people. We're very sensitive about it. We certainly don't want to misinform people or have people have the wrong impression. In fact, that's obviously our raison d'etre, because we think that the broadcasters and the other press are. It's a uni message. There's very little dissent amongst them. You know? That's quite scary. That should be very scary for people. The media used to be, or is thought of, as the people that hold power in check. But when you are clearly going along with everything that those guys want to do, you're clearly not holding power to account at all. Now, no.
I disagree with that, but we've already discussed that. When it comes to and I asked you this earlier, but I think it's useful and interesting for listeners to hear. How would you sort of summarise your world of view? What do you think's happening? What do you think's going to happen? How would you sort of explain it to someone who, you know, has never heard of things like the Great Reset or any of these agenda? You know, how would you describe it and explain it?
I would say slowly but surely, gradually, they are building a digital infrastructure which will seriously restrict everybody's choices in the future. It's not coming tomorrow, just as, you know, the pandemic didn't happen yesterday. Everything takes time to put into place. So they are building digital infrastructure. They're talking openly and advancing the central bank digital currency, which will be a new form of digital money which will be programmable, which means they will be able to limit how, where, what you spend and give an expiry date as well. They've openly talked about this. The Bank of International Settlements have talked about it. Many banks across the world have talked about it. And I mean, as well as digital ID, that will seriously restrict our abilities, because we had a choice, kind of, if you didn't want to lose your job, I suppose, if you work for the NHS, we had a choice about taking the vaccine or not. In the future, if my wallet, if my economy, if my ability to buy food depends on my taking the vaccine, that's a very scary situation. Now, you might agree, okay, but the vaccines are good. What happens if it's, I don't know, it could be anything that you might be against, that you seem as normal, but if you don't do it, your wallet will be switched off. Now, it's a really great way of establishing a totalitarian society, and there's very little, although the CBDC isn't in yet, but it's being talked about, it's being pushed slowly. It is the gate, because if you're restricted on what you can spend and what you can buy, then quite clearly somebody else has complete control over your decisions, and that is, to a British person, an absolute, obviously, tyrannical nightmare. My granddad fought in World War II against that kind of thing, but to wake up and find that this is actually happening in this country very subtly, very sinisterly, very underhand, and it's done in such a way, you know, including using people like yourself to other all opposition to it, to make them seem kooky and crazy. How can you possibly go against what the government or the NHS or the Bank of England or the BBC say? These are all good, upstanding. They used to be, or maybe they used to be, but they're certainly not now. Our job is to absolutely mirror that and hold a mirror up to that and expose it.
What do you think led you to this point? What do you think led you to... I'm always interested in what informs people's beliefs and who they are. Have you always been sort of interested in these kinds of topics, or was it really the pandemic that changed your view?
No, I've been awake for 10 years. So no, I was a complete believer. I passed the Oxford exam as well. I went to university. I watched 9/11 and went, oh, that's crazy. I knew it wasn't, you know, and then the war drums beat and stuff like that. So I've always been sceptical of obviously of government and corporations and what have you, but not, you know, not to the extent that it is now. And the difference now is I've done 10 years of re-education, reschooling, research, rereading everything, because I was a good student and I learnt the what they teach us as the curriculum, as the syllabus curriculum, very well. So, you know, I like learning about things. It was great to be able to go back and revisit all the things that we've been told, whether it's science, history, geography, cosmology, you name it, health, etc., etc. And it should be exciting to people. We don't have to accept what the BBC tell us. We don't have to accept what, you know, the official narrative is. There are a lot of alternative voices, a lot of different information that people can, you know, read and assess for themselves, you know, and weigh it up for themselves. A lot of the time, I suppose it's down to motivation. You know, what is somebody's motivation? What is Bill Gates' motivation when he's quite clearly heavily invested in vaccines? What is Rishi Sunak's? You know, what's his motivation? What's Matt Hancock's motivation? What do they have to gain? Is always a good question to ask.
What's your motivation?
Well, again, and that's what I was going to say. Look, if people out there go, well, okay, well, this guy's, you know, he's got a paper and what have you, you know. We have a newspaper one, but I've said several times, if people, this is the people's paper, if people no longer want it to exist, they don't want to distribute it, they don't like it, think it's hate or whatever, you know, it's not doing what we say it's going to do, then they will stop and it will stop. So my motivation is simply to help get the truth out.
Darren, from our point of view, it'd be good if
one more
throw
question
the
now.
Same questions back to Marianna about her worldview, because we've got it of yours. So that will be a good question actually. So I suppose it's going back to the first question as well. You know, what informs your journalism, what you're trying to achieve. How do you see? I mean, you know, I've given you a general overview. I'm obviously very, very sceptical and cynical of the establishment, the authorities, the organisations. I'm assuming that you're kind of the opposite. What's your worldview?
That's not true at all. I'm an investigative reporter, and I believe passionately in the importance of exposing harm and wrongdoing. I work frequently, as I've said, with programmes like BBC Panorama, who absolutely have that. It's integral to the work that they do and the investigations they do. I believe that it's really important that we hold power to account. I believe it's really important that we report impartially and that we're able to investigate what's going on, and that we seek to understand other people and we seek to look at what's going on in the world around us. And I think it's important that we expose that, and that we are able to explain to audiences what's really going on and get to the truth, get to the bottom of what's happening.
But what's your worldview?
But that is my worldview. My worldview is that I think it's really important. No, my worldview is that I think it's really important that that we all ask questions and that we all hold power to account, certainly journalists, and that bad things do happen in the world, but that doesn't mean that the conspiracy theories are true, and that we really interrogate and investigate what's going on. And to the question I asked you about, you know, what led you there, what led me here is that I'm someone who, I've always wanted to be a journalist since I was really little. Right. I've reported for local papers, I've reported from other countries where I've worked, where I studied languages. I've always been really, I really care about hearing from people, real people, and I really care about understanding what's happening to them and the way they're affected. I believe that we should exercise empathy in all the reporting we do, and that we should endeavour to understand. Mm-hmm. That's kind of part of who I am, and I'm a chatty person. I love talking, as you can tell. You like talking too, mm-hmm. And so I think that this is a job where, you know, I like to report without fear on issues that I think are vital and that cause real world harm.
So you'd say you're in the right place.
Right place for me?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I like doing my job. Yeah, I like doing my job, and it's important because I get to meet people. I get to sit here today. I get to talk to all kinds of people, and I get to really investigate and interrogate topics. And I think that social media increasingly is affecting the world around us, and that we really need to understand the way that it affects people and the way that it affects their lives, all kinds of different people and in all kinds of different ways.
Should we do away with it?
With social media, it's not really. Again, I always say this. It's not really my job to have an opinion, but I spend a lot of time reporting on the harm caused by social media.
Would it be better to just close it down?
I don't really think that's the question. Well, I don't really think that's the question. I think that we're now at a point where social media is so integrated within our society that it's how people live through everything. It's how people look at news events. It's how people know what's going on in the world around them. It's how people connect with friends, family. I don't think there is a world where that technology doesn't exist anymore. But I do think while it exists, it's really important to hold those social media companies to account and to report on what's happening and to understand how that happens. And I've done that extensively over podcasts and investigations. I did a BBC Panorama all about Twitter recently. So yeah, I think that social media is a part of our life now, and we have to hold it to account and understand how it works.
You didn't mention that, in the Twitter report, you didn't mention the Twitter files, how governments...
I did mention the Twitter files.
Put pressure on.
Yeah, we mentioned the Twitter files. In the write-up of the investigation, I explained the Twitter files, and then I also explained concerns that insiders at Twitter had about the decisions Elon Musk was making. So it's important to interrogate both of those things, and I did do that.
Okay.
Do you mind if I've got one last question?
Go on, then I'll have last one.
Okay, that's all right.
Sorry.
You can present the book to Marianna.
Well, yeah, we can give you this as a present if you like to take away.
I'll take the book.
You're an investigative journalist.
I will take the book. The question I was going to ask you, hang on, I've done it in very scribbly writing. You laughing at me saying scribbly writing? Okay, I'll ask this one. This just comes back to something we'd already asked, but I think it's important. I experience a lot of hate for the reporting I do. I've had death threats, I've had rape threats, I've had some really nasty abuse. Some of that abuse comes from people who subscribe to some of the views that are in this paper, and they're angry at me. They express that anger, but that anger isn't just legitimate frustration. It comes in the form of really scary threats that can leave me feeling worried about my safety. I haven't had much luck reporting them to the police. That rhetoric and that hate that can accompany not everyone, but some of the people who believe these things, combined with then some of the other kind of hate and rhetoric I've shown you, does make me concerned that it would only take one person for something bad to happen. It would only take one person who is frightened and angry, very angry at me or at anyone else, to actually take violent action. Do you worry that that could happen, and do you feel any responsibility to make sure that it doesn't?
I mean, I don't spend my life worrying about things that may or may not happen, but I would obviously not want any harm to come to anybody, whatever views they hold. And again, how responsible do you feel? How responsible does the BBC feel? Because we receive the same amount of hate. I've had death threats. I've had online abuse. And we all have experienced hate from masked up people when we weren't masked, again, instigated by the government and the BBC. So how responsible do you feel about that? How responsible do you feel by the abuse that we've taken from people who you've told are to be othered and are less than human and don't care about people because they won't get vaccinated? How do you feel about that?
So when it comes to online abuse, I don't think anybody should experience it, and I don't think that anybody deserves to be targeted with it. And there are all kinds of measures I take in my reporting often to try and make sure people don't. There are people who I often don't feature their full names. I make sure that they're protected from abuse, regardless of what they think or what they believe. That's not always the case when you're doing an accountability interview, when you're looking for answers, because you then do know who the person is, and you can't stop people knowing who the person is. I think that we're talking about slightly different things, which is I was talking about real life. Disinformation. Yeah, of course you are, and I don't think anyone should experience abuse. I wouldn't want you to. I wouldn't want anyone to. No, I wouldn't want anyone to experience any kind of abuse or violence. I think it's wrong, and I spend a lot of time reporting on people experiencing abuse and violence. So I wouldn't want that to happen. But ultimately, I can't not report on important issues like holding social media companies to account, like explaining and understanding how conspiracy movements work, explaining how people believe what they believe and why they believe it, explaining the people who are targeted. That is important public service journalism. And so that is just what I do. And I don't want people to experience abuse, and I take the measures I can to protect people, but ultimately that's just the case.
Yeah, we're in exactly the same business. We're coming from obviously complete opposite angles, but we're in exactly the same. Our goals are exactly the same. So, yeah. It is definitely a mirror. Okay, last question, and I'm sure you've been expecting this one for a while. It's several parts, but why would the BBC want to display a statue carved by the hands of a child rapist who with those hands sexually abused his daughters and his dog? Why would the BBC want to display this child rapist artwork in front of its most important building right at the front in prime position? Why would the BBC want to ignore the sensitivities and wishes of victims and survivors of child rape? Why would the BBC want to re-trigger the trauma of child rape victims? Why does the BBC not instigate discussion programmes and articles about the child rapists are at the BBC? Why did BBC cover up so many pedos working at the BBC? Is there a reason why a magician's statue was placed in that particular spot? Why did the BBC discredit child abuse survivors?
So, as I'm sure I've said lots of times, I'm not a BBC spokesperson.
But you work for the BBC.
Yeah, I work for the BBC, but I'm not a spokesperson on behalf of, I'm not the Director General, I'm not in charge of decisions. I don't say, oh right, let's do that today, let's pull down the statue, let's not pull down the statue. What I can say, and I do know, is what the BBC has said about that statue and what it has said just yesterday about it.
What do you think about it?
Because, but it's
what
not,
do you think about
not really
it? You're not the BBC, so what do you think about it?
No, but I'm employed by the BBC, and it's my job here to speak about my journalism and my reporting.
And defend it.
Yeah, I'm talking about my reporting, but when it comes to the BBC and the decisions they make about statues or decisions they make about things that are way, way above my pay grade and way out of my control, the best thing I can direct you to is the kinds of statements they've said. So the BBC has said about this statue, when the statue was commissioned, Ariel, as the spirit of air, was seen as an appropriate symbol for a new dawn of broadcasting.
Ariel's not a child in the
Tempest. BBC doesn't condone the views or actions of Eric Gill. Clearly, there are debates about whether you can separate the work of an artist from the art itself. We think the right thing to do is for people to have those discussions. We don't think the right approach is to damage the artwork itself, and that's about the damage to the artwork. I would say, and it's an important thing to say, I obviously, like I'm sure everyone in this room, condemn child abuse, think child abuse is very bad. I think any kind of abuse of power is bad. I wasn't around at the BBC when Savile happened, but I absolutely think it was atrocious what happened. I think it was terrible. And actually BBC Panorama, who I do lots for, did a whole investigation investigating the BBC itself for Savile. The BBC has, and there are loads of statements I could read you, profusely apologise for what's happened, but I can't be held responsible for the BBC's actions.
Not trying to make you responsible, I'm just asking you what you think about that statue, because Ariel is not a child in Shakespeare's Tempest. Yeah, so the idea of that was a naked boy being held in position by a magician and he's holding a flute has got anything to do with broadcasting whatsoever.
Well, that's your view, and what I think is that child abuse and any kind of it's horrible.
And the fact that you had Jimmy Savile there as well
does.
for 30 or 40 years, and you've got that, and it wasn't just Jimmy Savile, it was Rolf Harris and a couple of others, I believe. It doesn't look good. It's not a good look.
It doesn't look good.
And all the rest of it. Well, again, it's not your decision because it's way above your pay grade, but, wouldn't you want, after all that, some director at the BBC, some high up level to go, you know what, we really should take that statue down because it's got too much for child abuse. Even if it wasn't never meant like that, obviously child abuse victims have serious problems with it. It's a grown man with a naked child. It's at the BBC building where Jimmy Savile was allowed to run riot. Surely we should be sensitive about this topic. Surely we should just take it down and put a camera up or something, an old BBC camera up, or something that's obviously got to do with broadcasting. Why does it have to be a grown man with a naked child?
So again, it is, as you said, above my pay grade, and it's not my decision what happens with that statue. What I can say, as I've said, is that it's just outside of my decision making. It's not my decision. What I do think is that child abuse is bad, and what I do think is that it's important to also consider, while there are these really horrific and real examples of child abuse that I absolutely condemn, that the BBC does a lot of investigations and reporting to hold account child abusers, to hold account even itself for Savile, but beyond that. So I passionately believe in the work that my colleagues do, really exposing how that happens and the people affected by it. I think it's incredibly important, and the BBC absolutely does that. But the BBC is a big corporation, and I can only speak on behalf of what I do and the journalism I do.
And your opinions on it. Okay, well, I think that's gone really.
Can I ask you one final question? It's a good question. It's a question you can ask me as well.
I may or may not answer it.
Okay. Has this conversation and meeting me in person changed your impression of me?
Only slightly. I was expecting, a smart, bright, journalist full of energy.
Thank you.
So that's what I was expecting. Obviously, I read about you, and yeah, you've come through on that. I don't know. Yeah, okay. So same question to you. And what you were expecting.
Yeah, you are clearly really passionate about what you do, and you really care about it, and I think that really comes through. And I think you are compassionate and you do care a lot. And I think that I really welcome the fact that you were willing to have a conversation, because I think that conversations are really important to understand other people and to understand how everything works. And so I'm really grateful for that time.
Yeah, me too.
So thank you.
And the idea for an interview, with me is it's for the people watching and the people reading, so that they can make up, hopefully make better informed decisions, hear from both sides, even if obviously they don't agree, but make their own decisions for themselves. And I really hope people will go and do that.
Thank you.
The other question you forgot to ask us was, are they going to edit it in a balanced way?
What, this interview?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can ask me that, but I've already told you that. We will, obviously...
You'll weaponise it to the best of your propaganda. You've already told that.
True.
You've already told that to Parliament.
As I've already said lots to you, we will absolutely fairly and accurately represent what you've said. Obviously, this has been quite a long interview, and we don't have
to cut it down.
We'll have to cut it down, but we will fairly and accurately represent what you've said. And I hope, as has been the case with all kinds of people I've interviewed, that you will be satisfied with the product.
Will you balance it though?
Well,
just on that point actually, because if we do talk about the 9/11 whole
oh yeah, I did want to ask you, sorry, one tiny...
Your full...
Yeah, I didn't actually ask you, what do you think happened? What did you think happened at 9/11?
It's such a huge topic. I only wanted to talk about, obviously, how the BBC misreported.
But did that make you think
in a big way?
But did the BBC coverage and other things make you think it was staged? Did you think it was real?
No, not at the time. At the time, I thought it was real. Yeah.
But what do you think now?
It's only on later investigation, and it's quite clear that aluminium planes can't cut through steel buildings. Fires don't collapse buildings, and they fell in their own footprint. So it was obviously a demolition. More importantly, because again, it's set up so you can argue about the details for hours and hours on the event. More importantly, it's what comes after. Okay, and it's in seriously heightened security for everybody in America, everybody all over the world, to the point that you've now got to take your belt and your shoes off to go on a plane. Lots more surveillance. So really, if you were going to set up a totalitarian society where you could spy on everybody, and you had an event where there was a terrorist attack, and you demolished buildings and what have you, then you could bring in all these laws, because everybody's going to be very, very scared. We've seen this MO happen over and over again. It's not an isolated incident. And if you look at footage as well, you can see that, the story is obviously not, it's up there with the moon landings, that more than 50% of people don't trust what was actually said. Do terrorists exist? Yes. Could they possibly, even at the time, could they possibly be able to attack America with all the military hardware that the country has? There are so many questions about it, but like I say, for me, it's what it leads to. So again, same with the COVID pandemic, if you like. It's what it's led to now. So more online, more social media, people getting used to buying things online, moving that digital space, putting everything on the internet, getting rid of, the ability to communicate in real life and actually be with a person and understand them a lot more. So, you have events and then agendas move on. Have an event, agenda moves on. Always look at, if you're a truly sceptical journalist or person, what comes after? What's come after these events? What's the net result? Are we freer? Have we got, are we better informed? Have we got better lives? It doesn't seem that since 2020, everybody's lives have been deteriorating slightly. Our choices have been less. Everything's gone up, more expensive. There are more restrictions, more legislation, and that's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. It's only going in one way. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Don't forget to take your book, Marianna.
Oh, Marianna.
I won't.
So you do think the US government was behind 9/11?
I have no idea.
But you think that it wasn't what it? You think that it wasn't what it seems it is?
I don't think it was. Was it 13? I think it was terrorists with indestructible passports, hijacking planes and running them into the towers. No, that's been proven. Again, you can look at evidence for yourself. People can look at the evidence for themselves and say what's important.
But who do you think did that? Why?
Is what came after. Don't know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Piece of serious investigative journalism. If you're true to your word, you would look at that.
Yeah, obviously I always look at everything people give me, and I always read it and interrogate it. So I will.
It's quite. Right.
Thank you.
That one's his.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, let's not mix up nice.
Which is there we go.
Annoying. Cheers. So the big one's mine. Thank you.
Yours. Lovely.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. That one's yours. I just turned off the record.
Right.
Also, if you have any audio problems, we've obviously actually got ours as well.
Yeah, okay.
So if you need any of that.
Just for posterity, if I can get everyone to just be quiet for a second and just start, if that's okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Does anyone else hold the breath then?
Yeah, it's like some meditation.
Yeah.
Everyone's, yeah, it's like a game of yoga or something. Everyone breathe.
Yeah.
Let's make sure we don't mix up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got no back. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Don't worry, actually, just because if I collapse it down, then I can make sure I haven't left anything behind. So, just having the mini light there, I know.
This one.
Super quick, yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully, you might need to focus on your mics if you're first, and then.
Is this one? I need to get this out of the way to make my job easier,
Oh,
so you
yeah.
might as well help.
Right.
No worries.
Just.
And it folds up.
Gonna move
upwards.
everything here. Yes. Get confused. Yeah. And then if you just take the light off.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. That's amazing. The small one first.
And does that stay on?
No, that comes off as well, if that's possible.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that was good bad.
Oh, yeah.
I'll get a wall.
That's all right.
I might just leave that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you working on?
There's just if you hold away, there's the money that we didn't spend on the book there.
Oh, I feel bad that you paid for it. We're happy to pay for the location.
We didn't. No.
Because we definitely can. We can pay for it from our budget.
No, it's fine.
Oh, okay.
Not expensive.
Oh, fine.
What I'm saying is we've got free food. So if you want to eat downstairs, just sell it.
We've got to. We're probably.
Well, we're gonna
otherwise,
sell
we're going to
it.
miss our. You eat our food. Take it home.
I'm really about a couple of other people.
Yeah, do. We have got to get the train. Otherwise, we have to get the
Are you on the
expensive.
train?
Like, yeah, we're getting. Phil's driving back to Manchester.
Oh, I see, right.
We're getting the train.
Oh, okay,
If we
right.
don't get it before rush hour, you have to pay that really expensive one, or then you have to get a late one.
Yeah.
And we quite want to not do that.
The baby's here for the floor.
What? A late? No, but we're really careful about money, actually. Yeah, we're really.
What?
It's so expensive. It's so
Yeah, train's
expensive.
ridiculous.
Yeah, they're ridiculous.
Did you book it on the mega bus?
We don't have them. We could get them. We're not with all our kit though. Bit of a pain.
We need about 5 seats.
Yeah.
It's alright, they're only a quid a piece.
Oh, is this your guys' box?
Yeah, that's mine.
Oh, that's yours? Yeah, these are the... Those are nice.
Can I just stick them on top? Yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah, or I can just put it all in my bag.
No, we can put it in the box.
It's alright, it's probably useful for me to take it back. Alright. Is your menu tape? Oh.
All look okay? Sound okay? All good?
Yeah. And this will be, it will be coming out in June.
Oh, okay. Are you?
We'll let you know when it's.
Is it just the podcast then, or?
So it will be the 10-part podcast series, which is for Radio 4 and BBC Sounds, and then there's a digidoc that Olivia's editing that's for BBC iPlayer, and then there'll also be like a write-up that I do for online.
Okay.
And various other bits and pieces.
Well.
When's your next edition of The Light? Is it this month?
No, we just published, so we'll go out next month.
Next month.
Middle of June sometime.
Yeah.
So are you going to present it as
So-
slide?
I was going to say, if you give us an address, we'll send you one. I'm sure you've got some subscriber in the office, right?
Yeah, well, I'd like a subscriber.
Hey?
I don't know if we have a light subscriber at the BBC, but we definitely would like a copy.
Yeah, so if you send us an address and send it to them.
Yeah, great.
From the question, I think you're going to present it as the white paper has incited violence.
No, I think the thing that I'm interested in, which I was asking, is there are, I don't want to repeat the interview again, but there are examples of people who have promoted hateful ideas, or who have promoted anti-Semitism, or who have incited violence in other ways. Who are featured, and it's important when you're doing an accountability interview to ask those questions, because ultimately some of the research that we've seen suggested that there are some people who think violence is justified, and that's an important question for us to interrogate. But obviously we've talked about a whole range of different things, so we're not just going to focus on one particular thing, we'll focus on various things that we've chatted about. But what we're understanding ultimately throughout the podcast is how the movement has evolved and changed since the pandemic, because for a lot of people they're quite surprised that the light still exists, or that the movement still exists, or that rallies still happen, and so it's about understanding why that is still happening and the consequences of that.
What are we protesting against now?
Yeah, essentially. People are interested in why are people protesting in their towns, why is this happening, the impact it's having on them, and the impact that it does have on just that's kind of how it works, really, just understand.
It's really interesting, isn't it, from a kind of point of view when there's not that many local newspapers that are doing that well, or papers that are doing that well.
Yeah, and then yours is one that it's just really interesting.
It might be because the people that support it pay for it, so we're free at the other end. Although, you'd say the Met's pretty successful. It must be. Met's not straight. It's an average small business. But the Metro, it's got plenty of advertising, so you'd say that's still been a very successful pay because it's given away free.
Right, I
was interested because the answer might be no, and whatever it is, but I wondered whether any of your, because I find the advertising really interesting, and also that I imagine you have kind of quite committed advertisers, like people who advertise like every month or whatever, and I wondered whether any of them might be up for speaking to us, because it's quite interesting that that's where. I don't know that they choose a paper to advertise their. The answer. I don't know whether you think any of them might be interested in talking to us. Just get in touch with us. Yeah.
I won't bring around saying don't speak to you. They think they'll make their own decision.
No. It's more that
you might find one or two who
will chat,
especially if you know that weeds or like it.
And is there the Light Recruit as well? Because I looked at that. Is that run by you guys as well? Is that run by someone else? It's a separate thing. Okay. So would the people behind that be interested in talking, do you think? Or doubt it?
They're not really. And then yellow bag. I think they're recruited.
Yeah.
But they want to obviously recruit.
Within a kind of type of.
And obviously their employees like that as well. So.
Yeah.
So at least they're not going to get died suddenly.
It's so fascinating because that's like a whole ecosystem.
That's like a whole,
We didn't get to chat about it because you mentioned alternative. Obviously, we talk about solutions. And obviously, you have to pivot it to the violence and all the rest of it. But part of it is, alternative systems, if you like. It's just doing things outside of, you know what I mean?
You kind of said that though, you did say that.
There's bands, there's events, there's
the festival.
There's festivals, you know what I mean? And that will probably grow because people,
for example.
There's t-shirts, That's how I actually make my money.
I said if you wear my hoodie, it says exempt from bullshit.
Do people comment? Occasionally,
I can't remember what I was wearing. And I went to Tesco's. So it was early on in the lockdown and what have you, so it was a bit tense, and he was just like, yeah, you got it on now! Real, there's a real Will Hunt spirit about people who've woken up, because your guys' reach and influence, and you're part of a bigger ecosystem, is incredible, you know. And until you go, yeah, I realise that is all complete propaganda disinformation, they're not to believe what you tell. That's why I'm so concerned. That's why everything you say, you know, you're doing, the disinformation that you put out may cause harms. We are, you know, obviously concerned that the disinformation you guys are putting out are causing harms, which is why we exist. But it's nice that we can actually have a civil conversation about it.
Yeah, I always like having a conversation. I think it's really important. I was just going to ask about the t-shirt. Do you find are they popular, the t-shirts?
That one is.
Yeah.
That bullshit one's gone on to mugs and all sorts.
Has it?
Oh, there's a few.
I can imagine people buying exempt from bullshit. I feel like everyone would buy that in some different way.
That was mine, that one.
Was it?
Yeah, we phoned Ross, didn't we?
That's a good idea.
Exempt from bullshit. See, you can even let them know what slogan you want.
Yeah. And does that help fund the paper? Do you use some of that? The merch, yeah, exactly.
It funds me, we don't sell me the merch.
Is it your main job and then the music?
Yeah, I've got several. Yeah, just online things, but yeah, all to do with truth now. Apart from the guitar strings, I have a guitar.
Which is
string.
yours, yeah.
Oh yeah. Because everything I forgot to ask, which I imagine is the case, but when you were saying, you know, it can cost 20 grand to make the paper or whatever, do you ever profit from the paper, or is it that you kind of just make enough to keep it?
Yeah, whatever. Either if we do make an excess, it will go on window stickers and bags and merch and, you know, what have you.
So it's not really like your salary?
No, it gets adjusted obviously each month, so we can do the maximum amount of paper. Because we want the maximum amount of truth out there.
And because I've seen the circuit, sorry, I know I'm asking questions, but these are more like facts for our script. These are like factual questions.
So we frame it.
So we frame it right, because I don't want to get it wrong. In terms of like the number of copies a month, because I'd seen, I think, 250,000 somewhere.
At peak, yeah.
At what is it now?
Oh, it can vary.
Yeah.
It can vary. It's well over 6 figures now.
Well over 6 figures?
Yeah.
And do you print them all? You're in control of the printing.
And then you distribute them type thing?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not.
I think what you mean
it doesn't go through shops or anything like that.
Well, it's not like you've got lots of different printers. It's like you.
Right, it's one printer, and then it gets
Yeah.
distributed to how many different warehouses? 30 different wholesale warehouses all over the country, and then people get from there. So it's self-organised. When we organise, and get right, you performed that. You know what I mean? It was just we're gonna do a paper, and everybody just went.
I don't want to forget that number.
Yeah, write it down. Just lastly as well with the kind of ecosystem, did it start with the paper and then become like the gigs and the festival, or was it?
It's all kind of tied up, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the parallel.
Yeah.
The coincidental parallel progressions.
And obviously different people do different things.
Yeah. Yeah, 30 hubs.
And you said 6 figures. Yeah, I kind of noticed that there's almost like protest movements. Read the light, and then kind of like that everything feeds off each other a bit, and then you guys organise like rallies or organise as in not you guys, but as in the groups themselves.
I know a lot of people that have nothing to do with the movement, but they love the paper.
Yeah.
Right, because they love an alternative news and to make their own judgments. What Daz has been saying the whole time, you know, the whole point of it is for people to be given different sources of information so they can go and find out the facts, the true facts, or as far to the truth as you can get, or near to the truth you can get. Because let's face it, truth is very difficult to get to these days. You know.
Yeah.
So, but
so it's interesting the people who are the readers. Yeah, like you've got the readers who are actually part of these movements and do go on marches, and then you've got the people who read it, who just kind of read it at home, like you say, who wouldn't necessarily.
They get it. One thing we didn't cover, the difference now, and this is feedback from obviously distributors, in how the paper is accepted, how the paper is received compared to 2 years ago. So it's 90 days, like it was 90% rejection. Now it's 90% acceptance. Now people come into the takeaways and whatever. I've got any more.
People actually asking for it.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to be doing something that people actually want. And this is not, hopefully, you know, it's quite clear, whether you portray it that way, that this is not some well, it's not one-man organisation directing everything, because it couldn't happen in the truth movement. We're too into independence of freedom anyway. If I tried to start dictating things, then we'd just go, go and work for the BBC, or, yeah, you know what I mean? It really is. It's incredible to me how this thing exists through a kind of just loose self-organisation.
Yeah.
There's nobody gets fired for not doing their job. They're just, okay, you don't want to do that, well, that's fine, somebody else will come along with it.
Whenever I do these kind of interviews, I always think that it would actually be a really positive and beneficial thing sometimes for like people to like spend a day with me at work, or to like see how the BBC works, because people don't actually like get to like come in and see like how it works, or what a meeting's like, or how people, I don't know, I just always think it's important for people to kind of understand like the process. Understand the processes and how it works. But anyway, yeah, thank you. I really appreciate your time.
No problem.
Thank you.
Great.
Cheers. Thank you so
Have
much.
a safe journey.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I forgot your name. Emma. Good to meet you. Hi, Olivia. Thanks. Olivia. Yes. Phil. Thank you so much.
Phil from Manchester.
Thank you for doing the door.